Good evening, everybody here and at home. Welcome to the June 14th,
What?
2000, pardon me.
What?
I'm already starting off bad. I apologize. Running late and it's the wrong month.
Speaking of Mike.
That's even better.
No one can,
Let's
no one
start
can hear
over.
that. Good.
Welcome, everybody, to the September 14th, 2021 Town Board Work Session. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, Ms. Shapiro, what do we got? Something called the FGIS. Can you please lead us off?
Selected sections to review. Sabrina is here to lead our discussion. We've got two alternatives.
You gotta get closer to the microphone.
We're having tough time.
I'm telling you,
Wasn't
what can I
on.
say? I apologize. Sabrina is here to lead our discussion of sections 2L, the alternatives, and 2F, traffic, transportation, and parking. Sabrina?
Good evening, everyone. Before we start going through the sections, based on your last work session where there were several questions regarding the financial feasibility analysis, and we were looking at the cost return on investment, we've asked Bruce Murray, who is on Zoom from the REST Group, the consultant firm who helped us along with those studies. He's here tonight to speak with you regarding some of those points that were raised that you're looking for clarification on. So before I go through the sections that you were given to review, I'd like to turn it over to Bruce to kind of talk to some of the points that were made to clarify some of the issues. So Bruce, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. I'd like to start with concerns that were raised regarding the perceived discrepancy in the return on cost metric that was used in some of our deliverables. There was a PowerPoint presentation that was based on a summary of earlier reports that we provided, and it indicated that a minimum return on cost metric to show feasibility of the project would be at least 6%. It would have been more appropriate for us to have said 6.5%, because that would be more in line with earlier downtown working group sessions that we had had and prior draft reports that we had submitted. Having said that, the return on cost metric is just one of many different metrics that are used by developers to determine whether or not to move forward with the project. And, so they use different benchmarks and within the different metrics that they look at. And different developers are going to have different numbers based on their level, comfort with the level of risk with any given project. So, each of these measurements are typically some kind of a measurement of the risk involved and the return that they would get for their investment. So we had spoken with several different developers about their view on development in Chappaqua and Newcastle. And by and large, their reaction was that they felt that Newcastle and Chappaqua was an area that is of generally higher risk because of the approval process being somewhat cumbersome and a little bit hard to define in terms of the length of time required to obtain approvals. And the lack of redevelopment in the downtown Chappaqua area generally supports the feedback that we've gotten from developers. So our conclusions of our analysis indicated that the three-story scenarios with the lower end range of income limits for the affordable housing component were harder to support in terms of financial feasibility. They were kind of on the cusp or just below that return on cost metric, although they were meeting the other metric that we were using, which was overall profit. So our view was that there might be some developers who would find these more difficult scenarios to develop, who would be willing to move forward. But by and large, most developers would view them as too risky for the level of return that they would receive. In terms of, the next thing I'd like to cover is the apartment rents. There was a perception that they were based on older buildings. We concluded to a rental rate of $3.80 in our most recent update per square foot for apartment rents on average. And there were, our comparable range included a number of different buildings. Some were older, but some were also newer, and some were proposed. And there are actually a few of the properties built since 2017 or proposed actually had rental rates below the $3.80 that we had estimated on average. So in general, we're comfortable with the market rent conclusions for the apartment space. The next thing I'd like to cover quickly is the retail rent estimates. There was a comment that they were based on the bottom end of the range of comparables. I want to point out that our conclusion was based on net rental rate, which means that the tenant pays all operating expenses. There were only two of our comparables that showed, we concluded at a rental rate, a net rent of $30 per square foot. Only two of the comparables showed rents above $32 per square foot. One of them was at Chappaqua Crossing, which has a superior location and has some major anchor tenants to draw tenants to the center, and therefore needs a significant downward adjustment. And the other was for a $40 per square foot gross rent, where the operating expenses were estimated at approximately $9 per square foot, meaning that the adjusted net rental rate for that property would be $31 per square foot. And finally, there was one property where on King Street with a rental rate of $30 per square foot, but that was also required the landlord to pay significant portions of the operating expenses, meaning that the adjusted net rental rate for that property would be well below $30 per square foot. So again, we're comfortable with the rental rate conclusions that we derived for the retail space. Finally, there was a comment about cap rates, capitalization rates, which are is a measurement, another measurement of basically risk and return for real estate, and that they have been moving in a downward direction. We had looked at several different data service providers, including CoStar, which is one who is able to most closely focus on the northern Westchester region. And they had indicated that indeed capitalization rates had trended downward from at least 2015 through approximately 2018. Our first study was 2019, when rates were starting to flatten out, and then rates actually started to increase somewhat in 2020 and the early part of 2021. Another measurement of return is an internal rate of return. It's just a different type of measurement for the same thing, measuring risk. But for internal, the PwC conducts a survey where they measure the estimated internal rate of return for land development, which more closely ties to this specific analysis because it's not yet a complete building. So we're looking at the risk of doing land development, and that is showing a significant upward trend in rates, meaning that it's showing more risk is involved in development. So overall, we're confident in our conclusions, and I'm ready to pass it back and available for any questions that you have.
I have a question. Something is echoing, but I don't know if it's me. There's a little bit of microphone feedback. Sorry. So back to the first topic, which is the profitability of 3 stories with an affordable requirement. One of the things that we have been discussing is if we were to pursue 3 stories on the east side of North Greeley, that we are considering not having a ground floor commercial requirement for that area. The analysis that you conducted, I think, included the ground floor commercial requirement. Is that correct? And so in
Correct.
that scenario, the conclusion is that with a ground floor requirement and 3 stories, that the AMI for an affordability requirement would have to be higher. But I would presume then that if we removed the ground floor commercial requirement, that would give us more flexibility around the AMI.
I think that for the most part, especially in areas away from the very core of downtown, that removing the retail requirement would provide, generally more flexibility, less risk for developers. Having said that, residential is somewhat more expensive to build, and so we did not test a specific scenario that tested that exclusion of commercial space. But again, obviously, the lower end of the ranges of affordability would be more difficult. But I think that getting to a level of probably at least 70% of area median income (AMI) should, I expect, without having done the financial analysis, I suspect would be a feasible project.
Okay. Certainly the other thing that I had been thinking about was if we were to cap the east side of North Greeley at 3 stories and made that affordability requirement a higher AMI, essentially more of a workforce definition, that would have a benefit, one, in terms of likelihood of success of construction or the investment being made, but also, moving toward the housing diversity element that we have been talking about, where we are including affordable workforce and market rate housing.
Right. Yeah, I think that generally makes sense. Again, without having tested it, another one of the very significant draws or downward pressures on the ability to finance a project is whether or not structured parking is needed. So, again, depending on any given site and how it lays out and the availability to include parking on or off the site could significantly impact the affordability or the feasibility.
Thank you.
Mr. Murray, I have a number of questions for you. First, just generally, are you going to be here, stick around so that I'm sure there are people in the audience, I know there are real estate professionals there who have much more experience than any of us on the board, and I'm sure they're going to want to ask you questions as well. Will you be around?
I can be available if needed.
Okay, great. So my first thought, and again, I am not a real estate expert at all, but it seems somewhat subjective. So you said, we're talking about like the ROI now, you were talking to developers who told you how big they wanted buildings. I mean, isn't that sort of a conflict? Because obviously they're going to want the largest buildings they can get to make the largest return on investment that they can get. So I would think talking to local developers who own that property is probably not the most objective measure to be using. I would rather have seen you look at actual properties that have been built rather than talking to local developers who have a vested interest in building the largest buildings possible. So that concerns me a little bit. And then you said the reason they're saying they're so high, aside from the fact that they want to make money off of the town, is because they're saying it's difficult to go through the process here. Well, if the stated point, one of the stated points of the form-based code was to make that process less onerous, then that actually flies in the face of that argument, because then it won't be as difficult, so then we can go to smaller buildings again. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there that I'm not fully understanding, and maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Sure. So in terms, we didn't ask developers how big they would like their buildings. What we did was we interviewed developers active in northern Westchester to get their opinion about development in Newcastle and their appetite for doing development there. So I don't see myself any conflict in that. But I'll leave that to you. In terms of the form-based code, yes, I agree that one of the goals of the form-based code is to streamline the process. Our assumption in our analysis was that all of the scenarios would have the form-based code in place in order to make it more in line, make Chappaqua more in line with the other communities in the area. Whether or not they have form-based codes in those other communities, it would help to level that perception that that it is a difficult place to develop. So I think that the 6.5% estimated return on cost reflects returns that they expect throughout northern Westchester and makes Chappaqua and Newcastle more in line with those communities.
Okay, that's not what you said as to how you determined the 6.5, that you spoke to developers, and the reason you came to those numbers and they gave you those numbers is because they were finding it difficult. So with that being said, then those numbers really should be going down. But putting that aside, I would love if you could provide us with the names of the developers who you interviewed and when you did that. So we can, because that would inform my opinion very much as to the validity of who you're speaking to and the credibility, not of you, but of the developers, and how much credence I give to what they had to say, and which is what you base this on. So if you could provide that to us, I think that would be really helpful.
I can do that.
Then, and I will let other people speak to this, but I've been doing some research on my own, and I see that there are new buildings all over that are renting residential for $4 a square foot. So I would urge you to look at that again. And also, your first analysis in terms of retail rent in the DGIS gave us a bottom range of $30, I believe, net, and now all of a sudden it's 35. So I was hoping you could speak to that. Can you do that now?
I'm sorry, say that again?
For retail rent, in your first analysis, you say that it was $30. Now all of a sudden it's 35 that is necessary. So I'm just curious where that change came from.
I don't think that's accurate. I think we used 35.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I flopped it. 35 in the first analysis and $30 here. Sorry, I'm reading it backwards.
Yeah, I think rental rates have come down over the course of the time between our two analyses. I would imagine that probably part of it was COVID related.
Okay. Then, just so you know, there's a very close town right next to us, Pleasantville, who just built. I like it. A lot of people don't like it. I happen to like the look of 39 Washington Avenue. That has 3 stories and affordable housing. So I'm wondering why you're saying that really can't work here.
That site, I believe, has parking underneath, correct?
Yeah,
And it has parking behind.
right. Yeah, I think that it is an example of a successful project. I don't know if it, based on the analysis we had done, I'm not sure if that has the ability to work in this location. It is a larger project, and it included two different, basically development sites. So, other than that, I don't have the specifics.
Okay, I mean, there's no reason other than you telling us so that it wouldn't work here. I mean, their lots are able to be combined. There are a number of larger lots available. So I would love, given that the analysis that's conducted, the FGIS, is still with regard to the whole 72-acre hamlet, just because even potentially if it wouldn't work on North Greeley, given that we're being asked to adopt an FGIS that relates to the entire hamlet, you need to study the entire hamlet, where there certainly are places where a building like that could fit in 72 acres.
Well, but we were focused on the downtown area to see what
It
would
is
work.
the downtown area. 72 acres is the downtown Chappaqua hamlet. Not even all of it, but yes, that's the downtown.
Okay, so I'm not sure what you're asking.
I'm just saying, if you're focusing your analysis just on North Greeley, that's problematic because the FGIS studies the entire 72 acres. So I want to make sure that your analysis is covering the 72 acres. And I just got troubled when you said a building like that couldn't fit here. Even if arguably it couldn't fit on North Greeley, it certainly could fit in areas that correspond to the other 60 something acres.
Something that he doesn't have.
Right. Yeah. No.
I'm asking him how he based his analysis. That's what I'm asking him.
Right. Yeah. I didn't mean to say that you couldn't fit that development in the hamlet, but the team had selected a specific site to focus on for a potential redevelopment scenario.
Yes,
And
it's 72 acres. That's what you are doing. We're doing work on a right now we're doing the FGIS, right? And that's covers 72 acres. It hasn't been whittled down to only be one street.
Right.
I wish it had been, frankly.
Yeah. Right. Our scope that was assigned to us specifically was to select a couple of very specific scenarios, focusing on a particular site. We did not, and nor were we engaged to analyze every potential development site in the downtown Chappaqua area. I think that it was just that scope would have been too expensive and time consuming to complete for the process.
Okay, that's great, but I mean, I would talk to the people here. If we're being asked to approve an FGIS related to 72 acres, and 72 acres has not actually been studied, how is that complete? As it relates to this, which the financial implications are arguably the most important.
Bruce, if I may to follow up on that question, just to clarify, whether it's 52 acres, 37 acres, or 72 acres, you're not studying every single block or every property to make your assessment. You're taking a sampling, if you will.
Yeah, the intent was to pick a representative development site that would be an example of what can occur. There are, every site is different, but this was selected as one that was representative of a potential development.
And that's a standard way to practice in your particular field?
Yeah, this is a very common approach.
So which sites did you choose, just out of curiosity?
So this was a site on the northwest corner of Greeley and King.
What is that, the Rite Aid site?
I
Susan
believe
Lawrence?
Included Rite Aid, yeah.
Northwest corner of Greeley and King.
That's where Susan Lawrence is,
B.
or the home's home.
would be home
Home good, home,
yoga.
yeah,
The old Sotheby's location,
Yeah.
right?
yeah, home. And anything else? Just that one?
No, the directive during the environmental review, when we started the process in the scoping document, was that Rest Group was to take a sample project as provided by Kimley Horn and Tortogalis and conduct some financial analysis based on consolidation of lots, understanding we have very small lots, and trying to compose a feasible development project. They ran the initial financial analysis or the feasibility analysis on that project. And under the FGIS, they were to revisit that same project and do a comparative analysis to make sure that we were sitting in a similar situation or understanding what had changed today. And that is what they did.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, all right, I'd love you to get back to us on the developers you looked at, and just to confirm that you believe that this was based on objective criteria and not subjective criteria, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All right, I think that is all I have right now, other than to say that I still am advocating to not remove the residential on the first floor because I think it will destroy the retail base of our downtown.
Bruce,
But that's not you.
Bruce, just for clarity, the 6.5%, that was just one metric you used when you were assessing risk?
Yes.
All right. And
The other metric was profit. And each of the scenarios did indicate that there was sufficient profit. It was the return on cost that was more problematic for some of the lower scenarios. But yeah, again, that was based on selecting a rate that would make Chappaqua more, having the form-based code in place to make it more comparable to the other communities.
And when you considered other measures such as heights, you didn't go out to a developer and say, what height do you want? That's not the question you're asking him or her.
No, not at all.
Thank you. And last thing, and that was developers in northern Westchester. We're not talking Chappaqua specific only. Or even Chappaqua specific.
Right. Some of the developers were active in Chappaqua, or two of them. Most were active elsewhere in northern Westchester.
Thank you. All right, thank
You know what doesn't make sense to me about this, and I just have to go there. So every site in the downtown hamlet is different, obviously. So there are some you have where, like, the former, restaurant is Maxime's, right? Which is long and very narrow. And then you've got others like Rite Aid, which is large. You've got a train station, for instance. You've got areas that are very different. So to me, I guess I'm not understanding is to say, okay, 3 stories don't work, only 4 stories works. For affordability, it's got to differ based on the lots. So a lot that has significant room for parking and doesn't really have to do much work is going to be very different than a lot that is very long and narrow or very small and is not going to be combined. So to me, it's hard to make that very general assumption on such a diverse area type, grouping of lots.
I think it's important to note that, the project itself, there was a build out of the entire study area, right? And that build out in certain instances had to resolve on a specific consolidation of lots, right? Certain assumptions were made by the consultant team to bring lots together. It's unnecessary to bring lots together, for example, on the train station, right? It's unnecessary to bring lots together on where Maxine's used to be or on Rite Aid. But to get a clear picture of what the maximum theoretical build-out could be, the consultant team under the State Environmental Quality Review Act had to pull together lots and conduct a build-out. Yes, Lisa, different characteristics for different lots, absolutely. Your code is not an absolute code. The code we're talking about allows a range of heights. We initially started with a 2 to 5 height in certain areas, very few areas, based on certain rationales, certain assumptions, certain reasonings. The board changed that to 2 to 4. Some areas still have an upwards limit of 3 stories, right? So it's different depending on where you are in the study area, and not every area is treated the same. The intention of the financial analysis was to really get a snapshot of what's going on, because there's also a history of decades based on our existing code, which allows 2 to 3 stories today, where we haven't seen a lot of change, and not because there's not a desire, but because it's just what we've been told in my office. There are too many hurdles and it doesn't make financial sense. And so we wanted to test that as part of this analysis, because we felt it was important to understand, what does an extra story mean? What does an extra 2 stories mean? And so that is what REST Group did, is they took a sample project in a very realistic scenario to see if it would work, given the constraints we have, knowing we can't go subsurface. So it was kind of it was a point in time for a project in the midst of a larger study to try and understand what we suspect in relation to what goes on in the market.
Right.
And this is standard.
It's standard practice when you, in
Thank you.
accordance with the State
Yeah.
Environmental Quality Review Act, you need to conduct a maximum impact analysis.
Thank you.
So again, just in using this information to help inform what we will do.
Yeah.
Do we understand how that this model, so let's say we're building this model that is commercial feasibility for construction for 3 stories with a 10% affordable requirement set at an AMI of 60. How that scales with mass of project. So if we're thinking about the east side of North Greeley, the mass of anything is going to be significantly limited by the tiny depth of some of those lots.
The shallowness.
So how do we use this information to inform feasibility when we are talking about,
So
very
on
different
every-
conditions?
On every property, except for public property, the train station property, you run into a depth issue of the lots. It's just the way that the downtown is put together. So we felt that it was pretty replicable in relation to the depth of the lots, the need to park the lots, and all of the other requirements, the stormwater requirements that development requires, right? So I feel it's pretty replicable in relation to the actual physical characteristics of what is in the hamlet today, and how the lots are shaped, most importantly, the depth of the lots, and the fact that we have a history of development in the hamlet, and they come into the building department offices on a regular basis, outside of COVID,
Right.
to talk about what they can do with their properties.
Yeah.
So I feel comfortable that it is replicable
And representative.
and representative for all of the privately held lots in the hamlet.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.
You're welcome.
All right, just hang tight for a little while. Who do we have up next?
I am actually going to share my screen and present to you some information about the sections that were shared with you this past week. Okay, so here we are in an additional work session to discuss some of the sections. Here is a listing of all of the sections. The italicized sections are sections that you have received in one form or another in draft form. The red sections tonight are the two sections that we are going to talk about this evening. And there are two sections, community facilities and services and socioeconomics, which you have not seen draft copies of yet, which are slated to be provided to you at your next work session. So I want to start off, and this is a very dense slide, and I apologize for that, but it's dense for a reason. One of the things that we that public comments had asked for is looking at the alternative section. And this is where we had our 4 alternatives. There's no thresholds in this section. At your last work session, we talked about thresholds, right? And they come from all of the information in each of the impact areas. When it comes to alternatives, there's really no thresholds, but it is a comparison of the proposed action in relation to the selected alternatives that we studied as part of the environmental review. As I said before, there were 4 alternatives. Alternative A was do nothing. All right, no new conditions existing, no new development under existing conditions. The second alternative was considered a no action, but it was the build out under the existing zoning. This is what could happen today. The third action is the full build out of the form-based code without publicly owned land, without the train station, without the parking lots, without, whatever the recreation field, whatever properties we had identified in that build-out analysis, they would not be developed. The fourth alternative was a full build-out with the height reduced to 4 stories. So that included build-out on public lands. Now, based on your new direction, alternative D becomes the preferred alternative in the FGIS, okay, because you eliminated all 5 stories. You also limited the area that you are looking to apply the legislation to. So in looking at the FGIS, alternative D is your preferred action, okay? That's important because it changes the proposed action that we set out with at the beginning of the secret review. We've now identified a new preferred alternative.
But
And for
Sabrina,
clarity-
I'm sorry, we're not just applying it to
I
North
understand
Greeley.
that.
So it needs to study all 72
And
acres.
it is. This
Okay,
alternative.
because you're saying we've only chosen to apply it, but
Well,
we
I'm
know
saying
if,
what you're-
let me finish, but we know if adopted, it could conceivably be applied anywhere.
100%, Lisa. And the reason why I clarified it is because I was speaking of your new direction.
What's
where
the new
board
direction?
Set forth out that limited area. This analysis, this alternative, studies the entire 72 acres, okay?
Okay,
And in
but
this
when you're saying new direction, how are you defining new direction? As just North Greeley? Or are you
it's
putting other
removing
things
the
in
fifth
there?
story. It's your board's direction.
Well, okay.
You guys called it the new direction. It was removing of the 5th story and limiting the area of application.
But not in the FGIS.
That is not defined, that is not studied separately instead of the 72 acres in the FGIS.
It is not.
It is not. The FGIS studies the 72 acre study area, okay? There are references to impacts in relation to the limited area, but only for comparative purposes because that is what you are interested in taking action on. And that will help in making findings later on.
And one thing before you leave the slide, I don't know if you planned on it, for clarity, with the no action, you're talking 341 units. When then you go to C and D, you see 963 or 649 and 963 respectively. is that plus 341 units, or is that, would those 341 units, for lack of a better term, be counted in that? In other words,
Those 341 are counted in that.
Okay.
It's not excluding what would happen under existing. It's total new units.
got it, thank you.
Okay, and I wasn't gonna leave this just yet. I wanted everybody to have a chance to look at it. It was provided in the alternative section that you reviewed, and it is a really good comparison of impact. So I wanted to bring it to your attention. Do you have any other questions regarding alternatives?
No.
Okay.
Honestly, I just need to study it a little more. Like, I'm not saying I'm not going to have any because we just
No,
got it
listen,
yesterday.
This is
So,
all in draft form, Lisa.
Yep.
You'll have plenty of time
yep,
to
I just
provide
wanted to let you know.
comments. So then we move to traffic, transportation, and parking. And in this section, we do have identified mitigations or identified thresholds and mitigation measures. And this is pretty important because traffic is like a big topic for everybody when we talk about impacts. So there's a couple of different slides here regarding the thresholds. So for all development projects that involve a state highway or state right-of-way, New York State DOT will be a permitting entity. That's very important. It happens today, it will happen tomorrow. Sidewalks will be installed along various locations that are consistent with new developments in the hamlet. Okay? So where there's no sidewalk today, for example, on North Greeley Avenue, there will be a sidewalk on the west side of North Greeley Avenue. And there's a couple of different areas that are enumerated in the FGIS as well as the DGEIS that locate those sidewalks. So it's important to note that there is a prescription for where those sidewalks need to be placed. Bicycle lanes. This talks about for any development, consideration of adding bicycle lanes, bicycle racks, bicycle storage, signage, and more in relation to bicycles in the hamlet. It is also recommended that traffic operating conditions at key locations be monitored and studied on a case-by-case basis as future development is proposed and constructed. Okay, that's also very important.
and who would pay for that? The developer?
Yeah, that is something for the town board to consider later on. We'll get to that point, so hold that thought. For all development projects in the district, parking must be provided on-site or using the applicable sections provided within the code as adopted. Okay, so parking must be provided. So this is continuing the thresholds, and Lisa, this addresses who's going to be paying for that. Funding mechanisms must be considered for improvements, such as a parking improvement district, a fair share contribution. There's other methods out there where the town board is going to have to determine how you want to handle the payment of these improvements. Okay, and so legal will have a lot to say about that. There's things we can and cannot do, but identifying a mechanism to collect funds to help pay for future improvements
And that gets included
as part of your findings.
part of the findings. Thank you.
Traffic mitigation measures will be provided or required when specific thresholds of development are met, depending on where the development is located. And so this chart that's on this slide, you have the intersection and you have time of implementation. So there's a lot of concern, particularly surrounding the triangle, right? At year 2034, if we do nothing today, we will need to address traffic at that triangle, okay? Under no build conditions, by the year 2034, we will need to do something.
Why?
Because traffic numbers will be increase. It's called background traffic. It increases on average of 10% per year. Without anything. Right. It's just the amount of cars on the road. That triangle is no longer efficient to handle the capacity of all of the cars as calculated in 2034. Okay? I want to make a side note here. because of COVID, there has been a substantial increase in individual cars on the road, right? There are now 2 traffic cops that sit at that triangle and one at Woodburn on a more routine basis in town than ever before. We have had no development. We will need to make improvements at that triangle, okay? On a project basis, it was calculated if there are substantial developments. We need to identify what substantial development is. You have to remember, we are looking at a walkable hamlet. The intention is that people will not be driving their cars during the peak hours that we see today, people coming into the hamlet. The new development will put people here already. So there is a factor built into the traffic analysis to contemplate that.
But that's assuming they're not going to have cars?
No, it assumes that their habits of driving their car are not as direct as what happens today when people come into town to utilize the train.
They might walk to Starbucks.
Correct.
They might drive out of town, though.
Yes, they might. Again, this is not saying
Or to
that
school,
improvements are not
or-
needed. If there is development, substantial development, year 2034 may happen 10 years earlier. Okay?
You can build in within reason to handle whatever development is coming, in addition to, based on these projections.
Right, and so what's important is there's an appendix that's attached to the traffic section, which includes the technical memorandum that the town had commissioned by WSP
Right.
regarding modification of that triangle. That technical paper is very important in understanding how the triangle can be altered to improve traffic flow.
Then why didn't we do that?
At the time, we did not pursue it. At the time, we were looking at modifying the downtown project because the state wanted a pedestrian crossing involved in there.
Well, there was the whole roundabout, and it wasn't going to work for many reasons.
It was not the roundabout, it was the modified triangle,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And the teardrop.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and we got to a certain point with that, and then we just didn't focus on it. So, but that's not to say that that's not a doable approach with modification, and that's what the FGIS talks
Okay.
about. The improvements at South Greeley Avenue and the Woodburn Avenue intersection, this is the train station. It identified that if development occurs at the train station, at that town property, or on town property, that the build-out scenario, blocks 10, 11, and 12, as identified in the environmental review, will cause improvements to be made at that intersection. And then the King Street, North Greeley, Bedford Road, Memorial Drive intersection improvements that are identified in the environmental review are anticipated to be implemented when the development of Block 13 is undertaken. And I also included in here a map of the blocks. And if you look at any of the mapping that's in the alternative analysis and even in the DGEIS, you will see these little blocks that B2, B5. All of those blocks are enumerated throughout. They're consistent labeling of blocks that are referred to in relation to the traffic analysis and in relation to the alternatives analysis.
So can you just explain to me on your earlier slides, so did that mean, because I just want to get this right. Does this mean that we are going to have to look at mitigation for traffic in those scenarios, but we haven't done it yet? So we're just going to say in the future there are going to be issues and we'll deal with it then?
We've identified the mitigations. For example, the mitigation for South Greeley Avenue and the Woodburn Avenue intersection, when development occurs on the town property in these blocks, 10, 11, and 12 down here,
Yep.
you need to put a light at Woodburn Avenue.
It's actually in the paperwork, it's in
But
the
like-
materials we received.
Well, yeah, I'm just,
Too
when
much
we,
for me to fit on.
Well, when we were talking about, like, we're gonna have to do work at the triangle, we did a lot of work on that, and it didn't really work. So
We didn't change the triangle.
initially, when we were doing all that downtown work, and we ended up keeping the triangle, we got rid of the teardrop, and we didn't do the roundabout, we spent a lot of time analyzing traffic there, I remember. You don't need to look at Jill. In connection with in connection with Chappaqua Crossing, we looked at it, and then when we were looking at the downtown infrastructure, we also looked at it. So, right, and we also looked at how we could improve the triangle
Correct.
for a very long time.
But we did not make any improvements to the triangle.
Correct, but it was also because none of those alternatives were really feasible. And I didn't see anywhere a feasible alternative,
In the
other than to
FG
say go back to
In
what
the
you had.
FGIS, they did, the consultant group did not say go back to the teardrop. They said study the teardrop with pedestrian safety incorporated into it. That was the state's comment regarding the teardrop.
Okay, so it's not actually giving the mitigation, it's saying this is what you're gonna have to study further down the road, right?
In some cases.
And
think
I
that
don't
actually
mean this to be, I'm still talking, I don't mean this to be confrontational. I'm actually trying to learn and understand this should not be a confrontational process. This should be understanding and learning so we can do the best we need to.
I do not think you're being confrontational, okay? I'm trying to answer you. So, when we had the teardrop and we sent it to the state denied our application for that teardrop because it did not have safe pedestrian passage. We did not pursue, at the time, the town board said, let's not pursue it right now. We
Right.
did not pursue further design to incorporate a pedestrian phase, okay?
But we still don't know if that was gonna be feasible for what might occur in 2034.
The analyses that were done factored in a certain amount of development at the train station at that time. Is it what this plan had?
No, it
can't
didn't.
answer that.
It was in connection with Chappaqua Crossing.
No, we
No,
did
it was
we
in
did later.
connection with the downtown revitalization.
Yeah,
Are you sure?
There were a couple different studies, Lisa.
because I remember, it was either me and Hall or me and Ivy or all of us, no, couldn't have been, wanted to consider roundabout. It was Chuck Napoli's plan to do that, and you and Rob didn't want to study, you wanted to move forward.
No, that's not true at all.
So it
Feel
was,
free
we
to say
wanted
that.
further
The
conversation.
state wouldn't let us do the roundabout, and because of the topography and the hill that was there, we were unable to do that. It was an issue. Wasn't that Rob and I decided not to do
We
it?
looked
Thank
at
you
it-
very
we
much.
looked at other-
It was because there were studies based on that. Please don't put words in my mouth, Jeremy.
Yes, Ms. Katz.
So my concern is that that's the mitigation isn't here. It's just saying study it, but it may not be what, in 2034, may not be what was studied 5 years ago.
I believe you, Lisa, that there may be something better than a modified teardrop at the time that we need to
There
implement
might.
improvements at the triangle, and we need to cross that bridge when we come to it. Right now, we know that the teardrop, from a traffic circulation perspective, was a very successful mitigation. That's not at the exclusion of other solutions. I'll give you that, okay? There may be others, but we had some pretty good traffic engineers studying that triangle. We looked at several different renditions of how to make traffic circulate. Sorry.
So Sabrina,
Okay.
if that were, let's say, that's the model solution of choice here,
Sure.
right? That is essentially what's proposed, and denied for not appropriately addressing pedestrian circulation.
Correct.
What's our feeling about the ability to address pedestrian
According
circulation?
According to our analysis in the FGIS, it's very feasible to put pedestrian safety circulation into that modified teardrop.
Okay, so
Well,
then that
but we
would,
don't know what they'll get back to us with too. Because DOT, we know, or those of us who've been involved in big projects here know, that they always come back with something else. So while it may have been good 5 years ago, it may not be.
first bullet.
Yeah.
Identified here, okay? New York State
Right,
DOT
exactly.
will be involved. Nothing.
Right, my point is we can't just say, oh, it's just as easy as just putting a
it's not.
crosswalk
None
through
of
it.
this is
Of
just
course.
as easy. It is feasible according to our environmental analysis and the analysis that went into this study.
Right.
It is feasible to incorporate a pedestrian safety phase. Will that safety phase meet the state requirements? I cannot answer that. Okay? But the traffic professionals seem to feel that there is a solution. Okay? And by 2034, we will need to have identified a solution and be well into the implementation of that solution if we don't want to see deep F in the structure of circulation at this
Right.
triangle.
So then, Sabrina, have to, of course, ask the next question, because 2034 is the no action, right?
Yes.
Is the no action date. And certainly what we're pondering is action. And so where on the scale do you move the arrow back in time? That's the question, I guess, that you may
10
not have the
years
answer
ago?
to.
I mean,
Okay.
I mean, honestly,
Right, that if we're,
excuse me. Well, and that is a discussion for all of you
Yeah.
to have as we introduce development potential in the hamlet, even on North Greeley.
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to handle future contribution into traffic mitigation?
right,
That is a discussion that you have to have as a board. Per legal advice.
yeah,
But we started studying it how many years ago?
Yeah.
We did it with Chapel Crossing. We did it again with the downtown infrastructure project. You know, we've started analyzing it. I think we have a very good sense of what will work. The question is, what does the state need? Because it is a state road to make it work. And we have to work with them.
And then what's the duration of process for doing such a thing? If you wanted it in place for 2034,
What year are we?
it's 2021.
There's still time.
Is it a 10-year process?
5-year process.
5 years. Okay. That's helpful.
I
Thank
feel
you.
better with saying it's a 5-year process.
Wait, from start to finish,
3 to
including
5.
construction?
Okay. That's very helpful. Thank you.
You said, how many? You said 3 to 5?
Very
5.
optimistic.
5.
Sure.
Okay. I don't know if any of you have any other questions regarding traffic. Just to kind of go through the next steps. I didn't change this slide. There's 2 sections to be provided. The community facilities and services and socioeconomics. You've already received infrastructure, utilities, and miscellaneous. Your next session is 921. And I am hopeful that you'll have the entire compiled document for the 921 work session. That's what we're working towards.
And Ed, we added an extra day.
And miscellaneous. No. And you'll have miscellaneous.
You'll get miscellaneous, it's not been
Yeah.
distributed
Actually, you
yet.
will get infrastructure and utilities as well.
And Ed, we swapped around an engagement session, a work session. Why am I drawing a blank on the date? What was that?
So Thursday, it's on the slide, yeah.
Oh, great, super.
You made one on the 30th, I think.
You have Thursday, September 23rd. You have a work session on Tuesday, September 21st. You have a Thursday, September 23rd work session.
Is that at night or during the
and
day?
Public engagement. And then you have Thursday,
At night?
September 30th.
Right, so we swapped the 30th and the 23rd. Right. They had an extra
Work session.
work session in.
Okay. Super.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Okay, and then last slide is comments.
Or were we talking about parking? Did you want to go over parking?
I only did the thresholds.
Okay, because
so what do-
parking's pretty big. Do you want to talk to that?
What
Well,
are
I
we-
talked to the threshold of parking, that all
Right.
development needs to provide parking.
Okay. All right. Oh, boy. All right, so if we're supposed to be analyzing this for completeness, right? I think they got to go back and do a little more work. This is my concern, is that part of the comprehensive plan said increase parking near merchants. The way this toolbox works, I think it actually, and everything else, it actually decreases parking. It actually gives you the authority to make municipal parking into regular parking, which would then cut down our train station or build, parking garages. But it also allows parking up to, what is it, a mile away? So now I've got elderly people who want to come downtown. They now, according to the form-based code, can park a mile away. I don't know how they're getting there, getting back. And this is my concern. And yes, I know it's saying, okay, the developer has to maybe provide some transportation, but a current tenant doesn't. And it's going to impact everybody.
The form-based code is built on a premise that there will be no loss of existing parking. There are provisions in the toolbox which will be changed because the decision regarding municipal parking needs to be made by the town board, okay, because it's municipal parking. But regardless, that municipal parking is only recommended to be utilized for parking during certain times, not during daytime hours, because our municipal lots are used by merchants. They're used by commuters going to the city. The directive for this code was that there was no net loss of existing parking. The mile radius was if there is a developer who has a project for their residents and is willing to let them satellite park their cars on property that that developer owns within a mile away and provide regular shuttle service to their site for their residents, and they can show documentation that that shuttle will run, that they own the property the cars will be parked on, that they will maintain the lot that the cars are parked in, then they will have provided parking for their residents.
Okay, so these are my two issues with that. If the premise, which is a good premise, is to not lose any parking, by actually developing the downtown, you are inherently losing parking. Even if you said, okay, we have 1,000 spots, we're going to still have 1,000 spots. Yet now you've put in this 4-story build out 963 new apartment buildings. And there may be, hopefully, retail underneath, and people are hopefully going to frequent those stores, which is sort of the point of why this was studied in the first place. So now you have still 1,000, but you have significantly more people needing to use those 1,000 spots because, let's say this is successful and we now, well, I don't, depending on how you define success, I don't think 4 stories are, but let's say you've got 4-story buildings with hopping retail and restaurants. That's great, but you now still have only 1,000 spots. So you didn't lose any, but now the demand for those spots is significantly greater. You've actually doubled, let's say, the number of people who need it. So that to me is a problem. And the second is, I get that a developer, let's say, of a residential building, we're saying, okay, you can provide something a mile away. You have to show you own it and provide transportation. Where is that lot going? Are they going to buy up a residential property and use that a mile away? We don't have vacant lots that are just ripe for people to use for parking lots all over town within a mile of the hamlet, which means in order for that to even hold true, they would need to buy either a residential or commercial property and use it solely for parking. So you're going to now have parking lots popping up all over town, like Manhattan.
So what I'm going to say to you is
Yeah.
that it is the same problem that exists today.
No, well, but you're doubling or tripling, the number of units here now. We have 100 and something now.
You
We
have
could
a
potentially have
threshold.
963.
You have a threshold that all projects need to provide adequate parking.
But they can be a mile away, so now we're going to,
And they have to find and invest in that property to create the location for the cars to park and invest in the shuttles to bring their people back and forth.
And find
Right.
the tenants who are gonna wanna go a mile and park away. I mean, it seems, well, first of all, we were going off the topic of completeness and adequacy. We've kind of lost that, but.
Oh, why? Because I didn't
But,
think it
uh,
was complete or adequate, those
Okay.
answers.
So in terms of your position on the form-based code, in terms of that issue, the bottom line, Sabrina, is these aren't getting built and then saying, where are we putting our parking? If the parking doesn't exist, it doesn't exist. And you can't just go buy up residential homes, one would assume, assuming you could, and someone wanted to spend however they're going to spend, and then put parking on a residential district. You couldn't just do that. So there's not really much space for them to do that. And then you would have to assume, practically speaking, and certainly there are people, Ben, you could probably speak on this. You don't have to right now, but finding people willing to finance and then finding people willing to live in a place where they may have to park a mile away is going to affect the cost analysis or the profit analysis for the developer on many levels. And chances are, one would assume that it would be hard to go for that type
And
of
then
route.
let's talk about consideration of stormwater practices on your site to control the stormwater, and then let's add in affordable housing on your site
Yeah,
because of the
But-
requirements, and that's where the
But-
cost of developing comes
So I
from.
think where this comes into play is that in the event, in the future, a town board says, we want to rezone the train station parking lot, which is not adjacent to a property, and have a parking structure there, that would allow potentially for a builder to utilize that parking structure, not to buy up random plots and then somehow squirrel in parking structures.
So what you just so eloquently articulated is that this can't actually work.
No,
Because,
only if you do the whole
because
build-out. Only if you do
nobody
the whole-
can build unless they can have parking. There's nowhere for them to put the parking now unless they buy up residential, which isn't allowed, which means they're gonna now have to seek a variance to either change the zoning in a residential area, because they're gonna say you did something that I can't possibly
And that's
do.
where,
So they're either gonna have to change the zoning in a residential area to allow my next door neighbor to sell his plot to be a garage, or these aren't gonna be buildable, which
And
sort of
that's-
defeats the purpose of the whole thing.
and that is why it is a maximum theoretical build out.
But don't you
okay.
want it to work?
All right, so let's move on to the
At
adequacy
the
here,
end
but
of
let me
the,
just
at
say.
the end of the day, the amount of development that will be realized is not the maximum theoretical build out. It's a much smaller percentage, primarily because of the limited area in the hamlet to park.
So if the
You are
maximum,
contemplating an additional story. That additional story allows more circulation for vehicles on a site. It gives the potential to park for residences on the site. If your site is not deep enough or wide enough, that fourth story will not make a difference.
so
I
if
wanna-
it's unrealistic, like you just said, why are we
There are
looking
properties-
at it? Why aren't we cutting it down?
Right, so again, if you want to have that issue with the form-based code, that's fine, it's not an adequate question,
It
but I think
Is
what
an
you- no, it's not,
adequacy
but I think-
question. If it's not feasible, that's an
But it is-
adequacy
but it is-
question.
It's feasible in the event that the town board in the future and the public and the residents in the future support using public land, then it's a feasible
No,
situation.
the answer's bullshit. It
feasible
basically says,
situation.
yeah, figure it
It's not-
out.
You're creating
You
these.
can't build it
you
without
are
parking,
creating-
great.
There are ample properties that this can work. You are creating a fictitious, that
I'm
purple
not,
pink
Jeremy.
dragon figment to create this
I'm
line.
actually being practical.
So
I'm
anyway,
not saying this is
can we
passing
continue?
because of
Let's
my
get on to
ego. I'm
adequacy,
saying
please.
let's
So we're gonna
do
continue
what's
to
appropriate
adequacy.
for the town.
Let's continue to adequacy, please. And so if you have any questions as to adequacy, otherwise,
I do have many questions as to adequacy. I would assume you would too, if you had read it.
Oh,
So,
Lisa.
some of the questions say, okay. So, and the consultants are saying the FBC actually increases parking spots, which I couldn't figure out. Because it reduces the parking rates required by the current code. So I'm finding that's in like 2F,
Yes, the
think.
parking standard has been
36-ish.
adjusted.
so that was interesting.
Market today as opposed to the 1950s.
So, and then some of the answers, so you have like, some of the responses just say there's no support, just saying the parking requirements are appropriately reduced. Again, my biggest issue with this FGIS is that there are a lot of statements in here that are blanket statements saying, yeah, it's good. But it's not giving us that backup to understand why it's good. And I have, lost some faith in in this analysis, because I don't like that. If you're telling me it's good, I'm not going to believe you. I want to understand why it's good. And there are many comments like that, and again, I'll send you, where it's not incomplete. It's just making blanket conclusory statements without any backup. F88, we're talking about, hydraulic and stacked parking works in New York City and other areas in the metro area, but we're not that kind of town, so it maybe doesn't work here. So to me, that's not adequately addressing this. So I really want them to go back and make sure that we're having backup for all of these answers. And can I ask you one other question?
Are you going to approve the change order for that work?
It should have been done right the first time. They don't need to be a change order. I didn't need to pay anybody to say, yeah, it works, trust me. I could have done that by myself for free. So what my concern is, and we are fiduciaries of this town, and I'm not going to say something's complete when it's not complete to any reasonable mind. Now, Sabrina, my question with this whole thing we're doing here is we're determining if this is complete. And I think I'm asking questions, Jeremy, Lori, Lauren, as well as residents are asking questions for a lot of things that actually aren't complete right now and that are inadequate. So are they coming back to give us that, or on the 30th, we're just supposed to say this was a ridiculous endeavor because we're making all these statements and spending time, and all these residents are coming in and spending their time? Are we getting anything back, or are we just making statements and they're just falling on deaf ears?
FGIS, when you receive it next week in its complete form, will have changes based on the comments that we have heard during your work sessions.
Okay, good. Thank you, that's what I want to know.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
All right. Pardon me, let's pull up.
Did no other town board members have any questions? Was I the only one?
I feel like I asked a lot of questions.
No, I actually.
I think you
Look at him, look at him,
asked
you
a
know.
lot of the
Okay.
questions for me,
Not
Lisa.
texting me, it's my child at home, but
Anyway,
feel free to make things
so-
up as you usually do. But I mean, there are a lot of issues in this document. I'm sorry, there are. And I find it troubling that I'm the only one bringing them up.
Lisa, you
There's a
asked
lot
a
of
lot of the
inact-
questions that I had, so
Oh,
I
good.
didn't find
Okay.
it necessary for me to be repetitive.
Okay, perfect,
Okay,
good,
just
Yeah.
to be efficient for everyone's time here.
perfect.
All right, so if you folks want to come up and have questions about completeness and adequacy, by all means do so.
Was there a sign-in? No?
They were gonna sign their cards, but
Oh.
I'm not, I didn't receive any cards back.
Oh. Sorry, we usually have a
that's all
sign-in.
right.
I just didn't want to be unfair to someone.
The gentleman who's still on from Res Group.
That would be super nice, actually, if folks had questions directed to him to start.
Sure, I can probably
and then-
guarantee that I'm the
yeah,
only one.
and
But
then-
Ben Herman, 10 North Place, you've obviously seen my name in a lot of the questions. I heard you talk about the 6% ROI, which now is 6.5%. And I'm wondering why there was a report that in writing said 6%, and now it's 6.5%. And I didn't really follow the response on that because, it said there were two metrics. The new information confirmed that all those metrics were met. And now you're saying developers are saying 6.5%. So I still question the integrity of those numbers because one report said one number and then the conclusion seemed to determine what I said, and now it's 6.5%.
Right, so, the draft that you had seen with the 6% was reflecting a need to achieve at least 6%. And all of the prior drafts before that all indicated 6.5%. Earlier discussions had indicated prior to that draft 6.5%. it would have been more appropriate for that document to go out indicating 6.5%.
Right, so the FBC originally had 5 stories, and now you're saying it's 4. So the final number was 6%, and you're telling me the prior drafts at 6.5 were correct? It doesn't. I'm not looking to interrogate him. This is more for you guys to determine.
So if again, if it goes to adequacy, if you don't approve it because you don't think it's adequate, I understand. If you don't like how his number, that's clear.
The numbers, I think I basically showed you guys last week. The numbers have
You're a real estate
the numbers to me
expert.
have been
I'm not.
have been
Anyone.
manipulated. I've looked at thousands of projects over almost 20 years. Okay, this is solving for an answer. Okay, I'm financing properties today being built below a 6% return on cost, and now we're being told that the threshold is 6.5. You know, properties are all over. You know, they're different. So no, I'm not financing anything in northern Westchester, right? But metro area, prime multifamily with retail is generally built to a certain cap rate. And I'm seeing projects being built lower than, you know, what he's claiming the developers are saying subjectively, which obviously inures to their benefit. So again, I'm just, you know, asking that you guys look at the data and what's actually happening in real time, as opposed to what he's saying the developers are telling him.
Would it be fair to say that it's a range? Because I think that would be helpful in understanding, you know, to your point, Ben, that there are numbers below 6 that people are still building for that. And so ultimately, it's a judgment call, right, for us to say, okay, are we going to get someone here to invest in our town at below 6% or 6% or 6.2, 6.5? But I guess what I'm trying to say is that, generally speaking, Bruce, is it fair to say that it can be a range from below 6 to 6.5?
Yes, that's what I meant by saying that different developers have different metrics and different benchmarks within those metrics. And, you know, we said in our report that it is possible you would find some developers who would be willing to proceed with any of the scenarios that we analyzed, but that certainly there would be greater interest in the larger projects or those with less affordable requirements.
And one would assume in part also the size of the project is relevant too. A bigger project can take less because there's more units to pay into it, whereas if it's just a few buildings, 4 or 5, few units, 4, 5, 6, 7 units, there's a different analysis.
Yeah, there are many factors involved, and you know, I mentioned parking earlier. That is a very important factor, and the amount of or number of spaces that need to go into a project are important. This site that we looked at was a very hypothetical site, would require an assemblage of properties, and we didn't really make adjustments in our estimate of land value to reflect the potential increase in cost for acquiring, you know, an assemblage, which typically, as you get to include those last couple of parcels, you often have what are called holdout sellers who ask for a higher price. So and then there's also demolition. There's also potential tenant buyout costs. All of these things are assumptions that go into a development that different developers will come up with different assumptions. And some will be ready to proceed, and others will not.
Completeness and adequacy. Go ahead, Ben.
To that point, the report does talk about parking. I appreciate that, right? And it does talk about acquisition costs for various lots. I agree with all that. On the completeness and adequacy, on the commercial rents. So commercial rents in the DGEIS were $35 per square foot, as Lisa, you know, reminded you. Now they're $30 per square foot in the analysis. You know, Bruce, is it Bruce or? I think, hi, okay, sorry. I didn't want to get your name wrong. I think Bruce said that rental rates are down. I mean, we had Dan Soloway here, who is looking to rent space in the Hamlet at the last public hearing, say that asking rental rates are up versus pre-COVID. So I don't think there's data supporting the lowering of retail rents in a highly sought after suburb like this where new leases are being signed. So again, you know, and I appreciate what he said about triple net rents and gross. The rents that Dan quoted, you know, over $45 and over $50 a square foot at Chapel Crossing and downtown, triple net. You know, so we should be comparing apples to apples, and I'm not sure why that 35 was lowered to 30. In terms of the new construction rents, I obviously told you guys last time, you know, rents at 91 Bedford are averaging $4 a square foot. At 39 Washington, $4.75 a square foot. We could create whatever data set we want to support the $3.80 per square foot. You take those two properties, those are the two newest properties. This would be a new project built here in Chappaqua. Those two projects, if you blend them together, that's over $4.30 a square foot versus the $3.80 a square foot they're using. Again, it's a little bit of a judgment call, trying to provide you guys with the data. You know, you can determine whether that's complete and adequate or not. I just, you know, on balance, I don't think that these subjective statements regarding, you know, the non-feasibility of 3 stories are accurate. And you've obviously heard me say that. And, you know, those are kind of my responses to Bruce. And I appreciate there's some subjectivity here, you know, difference of opinion. I've obviously provided you guys with a lot of data, you know, appreciate your consideration of lowering heights to 3 stories. Obviously, I feel that should be the threshold throughout the hamlet. And that, you know, if there are extenuating circumstances, those can be reviewed at the time for consideration of going higher. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Ben. So Bruce, maybe you can consult. So Bruce, maybe you could consult LoopNet and see what the, you know, going rental rates are in Chappaqua right now, and towns closer to us now that are actually right here, and incorporate those into the analysis. Okay.
Yeah, we could look into that.
Any further questions on this point?
No, I think you did say,
Actually, just a general question.
Wait, can you say your name and your address?
Sorry, Suzanne Chazen. I live in Chappaqua. I had a general question, and this is really from a person who does not know real estate. But I know that aside from Amerenik, nobody else in Westchester has a form-based code. And yet, a lot of these developers, I guess you were talking to, are building, and they're building other places, and they're building it without a form-based code. And yet we're twisting ourselves inside out about this form-based code. Wouldn't it just be easier to figure out what the things are that are making things happen elsewhere in a way that we want to happen here and simply do it? I mean, I realize you're a consultant and you're, you know, been asked to do a certain thing, but my question to you is, you're talking to developers who are all over this county who are developing without form-based code. They're getting whatever they want. They're getting their rates of return. I agree with Ben Herman. I think the numbers have been a little bit played with. But regardless, why can't we do that here? What's the big deal that we can't just do a case-by-case basis?
That's not, it's nothing to do with the adequacy of this. Oh, I understand your position. You've said this repeatedly, and I understand and appreciate it, but that's not a
Well,
question
I'm
for him
asking,
to
I
opine
was
on.
simply asking,
But why
he's here.
he-
There's an opportunity to ask, since he's saying he's talking to developers, I would have just liked some background on, and I don't know, maybe the board has no interest in why this is working elsewhere, but to me, that seems like a fundamental question. We want some development in our town. We want the development to be the way we want it. Why is this the only way to go when other people are getting it without it? So I was just curious. He's here. I wanted to ask. If I'm not allowed to ask, I won't
Nothing
ask.
to do with the adequacy of this whatsoever, and I appreciate your concern. You voiced it before, and we don't necessarily agree.
Well, I just have to make sure it's being listened to.
I
Thank
guess
you.
you need to
Thank you.
hold it for come back, a public comment, regular public comment.
Either way, it's not something to opine on, but go ahead. Thank you.
Well, I have other questions about other things, but I don't
Thank
want to
you.
keep him. Are we doing other questions, or are we just doing this?
There'll be a public comment during
All right,
town
thank
board,
you.
no,
I-
there's public comment during town board meeting.
This is, okay, this
No,
is,
no,
this
I
is,
think she means like.
I mean, I
are we
don't want
only
to,
asking
it's
for
not about,
Barry
it's
so we
not
can
a
go?
question to the consultant, so I didn't want to keep him.
So
So I'm saying if there's other questions for the consultant, I wanted to yield my time so that if anyone else has a question for the consultant.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
All right, so hold on. All right, so Barry, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
just want to ask Carrie if there's a,
Oh, I'm sorry, Carrie, thank you, I forgot. Thank you very much, Carrie. Could you please let us know? Thank you, Barry, we appreciate it.
His name's Bruce.
Mr. Murray,
Oy vey.
thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you,
you.
Have a great evening.
Thank you.
All right.
So Sabrina, they're gonna answer all our questions and give us the FGIS or any potential inadequacies and give us a new version next week?
The consultant team will be addressing all items identified as not being adequate where you've identified why. There will be a red line FGIS after, as part of the complete document submission. We will identify the areas that have changed based on the town board's comments.
And we'll get that next week or the week after?
And this week, hopefully. I can't, listen, you have a work session next Tuesday.
Tuesday and Thursday.
Tuesday and Thursday, so.
Okay.
All right. Jill? Administrative items?
Well, I think there's more comments on this, just not for.
Oh, I'm sorry, do anyone folks have any comment in terms of adequacy? Completeness?
Yeah. Good evening, everybody.
Say your name and.
Warren Gottlieb, Chappaqua. Okay, I've read the FGIS pages that were released, I guess over the last day or so, and I've tried to plow through it. Wasn't a lot of time, but in the sections are traffic, transportation, parking, and alternatives. I do have just, I have a number of, an illustrative set of comments on them, of things that I was concerned about. One request I do have just generally about releasing these sections of the FGIS drafts. When you're releasing these documents, I really think the town board needs to do a better job of publicizing the release. I understand that they are put out publicly. I get that, it's on, but not everybody understands where to get those materials on E360. So I think it might just help because these are public engagement sessions, and people should know that it's out there. And the second thing I would ask is if you could provide residents and certainly yourselves at least a week from publication before having an engagement session on the associated part that you're releasing, because listen, I'm not a real estate expert, but I do read big, long, involved documents all day long, and these documents require a significant amount of time to digest. And I'm not quite sure how the town, and this is no disrespect, I say this for myself as well, I don't understand how the town board, or residents that matter, can complete due diligence on each of these sections, in less than a week. I think you got to give people at least a week. And I think this just comes down to, respect for the process, everybody's time, and the significance of the materials. And just before getting into my general comments, it's also been suggested publicly by one town board member that those who have an opposing viewpoint about the current approach are somehow not interested in working collaboratively, or not attempting to find compromise or peddling falsehoods and that type of thing. And I've been watching this situation unfold for like 18, 19 months already, and I don't think that's. I kind of disagree with that notion. I actually think that one of the reasons why there is so much public opposition is that there are many intelligent residents who would like to work collaboratively and find common ground, because they do realize that the hamlet needs to have vibrancy to it. I think that for a variety of reasons, there's a message that a lot of residents are getting that there isn't a lot of genuine interest in that compromise. I'm not saying it is or it isn't, but I'm telling you that that's the impression. And I do truly hope that that bridge can be gapped, because that gap can be bridged, because I think our friends and neighbors and the community at large really needs to work on that. So take that in the spirit that I put it out there. With that said, onward. Sections F and L are consistent with what I've seen from the draft FGIS thus far. Specifically, the portions of the document released are, in my opinion, incomplete, contain inaccurate and misleading statements, employ circular reasoning, and reflect some level of intellectual dishonesty and a result-oriented approach instead of the hard look that seeker requires. Although I do see that the town board has scheduled a completeness vote on September 30th, I think that date is really kind of unrealistic based upon where we are. The public hasn't seen the whole draft, nor have we seen any revised drafts with public comment and town board comment. I hope those comments are really being tracked very carefully. It would actually be great. I know there's the Chappaqua Forward website. If the comments to date about sufficiency could also be put up there so people can see whether or not their comment was responded to, that would be great, in addition to the town board. Okay, response F20. Response F20 simply does not respond to the predicate comment F20. The predicate comments are from the Chappaqua Central School District Board of Education and your favorite, yours truly. They request, among other things, an analysis of traffic impacts, of added residential and commercial developments on Bell Middle School, including traffic impacts during construction and development. The comments also seek a traffic impact analysis relating to potential redistricting due to the increased enrollment expected at Grafflin Elementary and Bell Middle School. The deficient response also suggests somehow that any redistricting that would occur would somehow be solely up to the CCSD. That's not really true. The redistricting that the CCSD is saying would occur would be as a result of the impact of the proposed action, which is out of the CCSD control. They're actually, the redistricting would be a reaction to the a consequence of the proposed action. I also note that the response confirms that we as a community are in for construction of, quote, 15 or more years.
Sorry, Warren, which question was this?
This was response F20.
F20, thank
Yep,
you.
okay. Response F21. Again, response F21 simply does not respond to the predicate comment F21. It blows off the comment. The comment asks that traffic impacts that contemplate the traffic pattern changes that have occurred and continue relating to COVID-19 as they pertain to all streets leading to Bell Middle School be restudied. These concerns are cemented by what we are seeing unfold this school year against the backdrop of the Delta variant, the threat of the Mu variant, and the findings and purpose included in, as the legislative context for the amendment to local law amending Chapter 86 of the Town Code requiring the use of face masks and face coverings. So I guess what I'm saying to you is that the document seems to indicate we're going back to normal, and that's why we don't need to restudy. But in the same breath, we're also having legislation tonight, the predicate for which is, no, we're not. And we're reading the headline saying, no, we're not. So I think that has to be looked at more carefully. That whole issue is being blown off. Responses F23 and F24. They also do not respond to their respective predicates. The response fails to provide the AM traffic study requested, and it fails to recognize, bless you, that increased traffic is expected at the choke point of Kink and 117. It also summarily dismisses the importance of ensuring bus stop safety at the referenced points. Response F31, also wholly deficient, but it underscores a major flaw with the form-based code and the associated 72-acre study area in the FGIS. The proposed action will increase traffic in the hamlet by up to, if we believe the consultant's numbers, 37%. The response to this is that there will be improvements to mitigate this traffic increase. Here's my problem. Goal number 9 of the comprehensive plan adopted on June 21st, 2017 is to, quote, alleviate traffic congestion. It says, traffic, especially in the Chappaqua Hamlet during the rush hour periods and on the weekends, is a major source of resident frustration. The town should explore the use of alternative circulation patterns in and around Chappaqua train station during peak travel times and in the hamlet during the weekends. To alleviate traffic outside the hamlets, intersections prone to congestion and conflict should be identified, and traffic flow improvement solutions should be developed. In short, the response that's given in F31 is essentially, We know what we're doing flies in the face of what the comprehensive plan calls for by intentionally increasing traffic congestion, but the town should accept that because when we are done increasing traffic by 37%, we've got some ideas on how we might be able to mitigate it. That's not the way this should be working. If the max build-out is going to cause a 37% increase in hamlet traffic, we should not be doing this in the first instance. That is not what the community said it wanted. Response F32. Response F32 purports to respond to 31 separate comments relating to traffic from residents. These 31 comments all express deep concern about traffic, and there's no surprise because, as I just mentioned, Goal 9 of the comprehensive plan calls to alleviate traffic congestion. The response makes no sense at all. It basically says, we think that traffic will go up by 10% over the next number of years if we do nothing. So what's the harm of really hitting the accelerator and going to a 37% increase and then trying to figure out how to get that higher number down a bit? No, that's not what the comprehensive plan calls for. You don't first increase traffic by 37% only to then alleviate a problem that should never have been intentionally exacerbated in the first instance. Response F35. This response was essentially non-responsive. It related to our community's senior citizens and indicated that if they lived downtown, they would not be able to walk a quarter of a mile, 5 city blocks, to their personal vehicle, and expressed concern about the ability of any senior living downtown, their ability to get to a supermarket without their car. The response was, and I'm paraphrasing, essentially to tell our seniors to take the bus or train. Please. If the premise is that the seniors are going to want to move downtown, I think they are owed a deeper response than essentially saying, take the bus. Response F36. This response essentially blows off the request that the traffic impact study be updated, recognizing that it was done in September and October of 2019, pre-COVID, and as the downtown construction was being completed. Instead, we are given a New York State DOT recommendation that in essence says, don't worry about COVID, just look at what was normal before then. Friends, that does not fly. Who says we are going back to what was normal? This runs counter to the findings and purpose included as the legislative context for the amendment to local law amending Chapter 86 of the Town Code, requiring the use of face masks and face coverings that is currently being considered by the town board. So on the one hand, we're saying just assume that things are going back to normal, and on the other hand, we're considering legislation that says that things are not, and I trust that the town board is looking at those things soberly. Further, I think just blindly accepting the New York State DOT's bare minimum recommendations underscores the concern I gave last time, which essentially is the following. This town board has made it a point for as long as I've been following it, with great fanfare, to not approach state minimums or other political subdivision minimums as a ceiling as to what they should do to protect the citizens of this town. It's meant to be a floor. So I think in this instance, we should not simply be assuming that we are going back to normal. Maybe before the summer, I think that might have been something I'd be a little bit more open to, but it does not look like that is the case. It just doesn't. And I say that with deep regret for all of us. Response F52. This response was also, I'm getting close to the end, was also totally unacceptable. The commenter was asking the following question, and it wasn't answered. The question was as follows. Will the FBC make my commute to NYC longer, or will it stay the same? Will it be easier or more difficult to park? Close quote. The response was a single, unsupported sentence saying there would be no significant impact on commute times, and the response made no mention whatsoever about the additional time getting to and from the train station with increased density downtown, both during and after the expected 15 years of construction. Response F68 similarly dismissed concerns about exit times from the lot for commuters. The same goes for response F69. I only have two more. Response F125. This response claims that the proposed action will only be on North Greeley. If that's the case, the board should not be studying all 72 acres and certainly not making a finding statement regarding all 72 acres. Otherwise, I believe, in my opinion, you are permitting a future town board to pass legislation as to all 72 acres at a single legislative hearing by a future town board, and we also risk creating a false impression with residents that such a scenario isn't in their future. And finally, response L13. Response L13 is the standard non-answer, but it really gets at a fundamental flaw of the DGEIS and now the draft FGIS. The document, by design, fails to take a hard look at the spectrum of alternatives that exist essentially between no changes to our existing Euclidean zoning framework and B, the complete gutting of that framework, planning board role, and resident input in the 72-acre downtown hamlet by virtue of a form-based code. In my opinion, this is why from the very outset, seeker has not been complied with, and why this endeavor is facing tremendous resistance from our community. In short, neither of the two alternatives that you are studying are what the 2017 comprehensive plan calls for. In short, I think this document needs a lot more work. I think it needs a lot more study. And, I know the town board, at least three of you are indicating that you want to continue plowing ahead with this. I think if that's going to be the case, this document needs a lot more work. Thank you.
Thank you, Warren. To one of Warren's last comments, I have made this request before that in these responses, that an answer to a question, well, this is only intended for the North Greeley corridor, is not a sufficient answer to the question because we do need to, the questions do need to be answered with the full study area under consideration. I think that referring to that could be used as an example in the answer of how the town board could make legislative decisions around the staging of zoning change to mitigate impacts over time. There was another question that I had based on one of Warren's earlier comments, and I lost my train of thought a little bit, I have to say, along the journey. But, I think that one of the points that I have taken away from this report and this exercise and our conversation this evening, right, is that we already know we have traffic issues. And as you were pointing out this evening, no action still requires traffic mitigation and planning toward traffic mitigation within, the foreseeable future. And so when we think about the usefulness of a mitigation step, like the triangle, how do we model that? Is the assumption that this modified teardrop with pedestrian addressing would be sufficient to handle a full build-out scenario? And then if we had anything less than a full build-out scenario, we would have a traffic mitigation that would be effective in the community.
Correct.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you.
Yeah, and that is why the appendix includes that
Right.
technical memorandum. Because it includes traffic counts.
Right.
And circulation
Right,
information.
right. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
That's what I was thinking.
So you want to join us? Anyone up?
Still talking traffic?
Whatever you want.
Scott Levine, I'm a resident of 149 King Street, the townhomes. I'm speaking with you about these sections of the EIS that we've been talking about from a position of some expertise. I'm a professor of urban planning at the State University of New York and a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. There's a lot going on with this process and these documents. I think it's unreasonable that you're being asked to declare these highly technical sections to be accurate, adequate, and complete for inclusion in a final GEIS on such a very limited time frame. The traffic analysis, including the responses to public comments that were published several days ago, remains inadequate, inaccurate, and incomplete. You should not declare on the basis of the information in front of you that it meets any of the adequate, accurate, and complete standards. Regarding traffic impacts, in a nutshell, the documents do not provide either the public or the decision makers with a reasonable disclosure of the impacts on traffic conditions from the actions you're now contemplating. Many of my neighbors have said that they routinely experience congestion driving through the hamlet at various times on weekdays and weekends, and they're perplexed that the traffic analysis does not acknowledge this. In simple layperson's terms, the future traffic impacts will be worse than has been revealed to the public thus far for several reasons. The reasons are technical and dense, and I'll get there in a moment, but the summary is that there's a series of problematic assumptions and problematic decisions on which the analysis is based. I'm going to send you this because it's going to get technical. Okay, so to get into the weeds. One reason is that the background amount of traffic in the EIS traffic study is much lower than in the recent similar intersection capacity analyses performed for the Streetscape project. At Quaker and Greeley, King and Greeley, and Woodburn and Greeley, the existing conditions traffic volumes in the GEIS are 7%, 21%, and 69% lower than those analyzed in the Streetscape project respectively. I don't know the reasons for this discrepancy, but I do know that the effect is that including less existing background traffic in the EIS's analysis makes it appear that there is a larger amount of unused capacity to accommodate additional traffic from future development. A second reason is that the Streetscape analysis used movement-specific peak hour factors, which are generally lower than the intersection average peak hour factors used in the EIS's traffic analysis. It also doesn't account for friction from on-street parking, which it should. And again, the effect is to make it appear that there is a larger amount of unused capacity to accommodate additional traffic from future development than there really is. A third reason, and we heard this in the previous speaker, is that the decision to not study weekday morning and weekend traffic conditions is problematic and is not proportionate to the magnitude of the project and its potential impacts. It does not represent a hard look. The Downtown Streetscape project and the Chappaqua Crossing projects, which are both much smaller in magnitude, both analyzed weekday morning traffic conditions, which includes school traffic. I mentioned this in a public comment in which I explained in detail why the argument in the EIS that morning and weekend analyses are unneeded is a specious argument. My comment on this point is only partially included in the town's published compilation. It leaves out my documentation that the EIS's argument is specious, and hence it doesn't respond to it. See comment F15, and as an aside, I think we do need to make sure that there's not this sort of chopping out of parts of comments. I don't know whether this is happening to other people's comments as well. I just know that mine has been chopped. A fourth reason is that response F8 is inaccurate in responding to my comment that the town has wrongly and aggressively claimed credits of reduced trip generation from vacant commercial space. Tables 8 and 9 of the GIS's traffic study are unambiguous on this point. Response F8 also presents the first mention that we've seen of a treatment of trip generation of 1/2 of vacant space, which is not reflected in the GIS's traffic study nor the trip generation spreadsheets that accompany it. This matters because pretending to add fewer vehicle trips to the road network would mean pretending that the impacts are less than they genuinely will be. Fifth, the specification of signal phasing in the intersection capacity analysis is incorrect, and it does not correctly model the increase in pedestrian vehicle conflicts. Sixth, the responses simply ignore my requests for electronic data files that are at the core of the traffic analysis. This request was so that the public can transparently review the analyses. See comments F10 and F11. Response F18 appears to be inconsistent with Table 10 of the traffic study. This would be verifiable if my request for the data files had been accommodated. Seventh, response F9 is inaccurate. Under traffic conditions such as those experienced when we have trains emptying in the evening, a traffic officer has been shown to be a more efficient traffic moving mechanism than a traffic light, so adding a traffic light does not therefore serve as mitigation. Eighth, the proposed thresholds are not reasonably related to the conditions causing the need for mitigation. The need for traffic mitigation is caused by increased traffic generation throughout the hamlet, not by the development of the specific adjacent parcels to the location of the mitigation. Ninth, a simple averaging of the pass-by credit values quoted in the document calculates to 45%, not 50%, even if we assume that a third of the new restaurants will be high turnover and another third fast food restaurants, rather than the quality restaurant category, which I think is what the proponents of this project are telling us we will get. The 50% quoted and employed is thus aggressive and has the effect of minimizing the apparent traffic impacts. 10th, response F61 mentions an 8.5% parking credit for the various gimmicks in the parking toolbox. This number is not substantiated in the GEIS traffic study. Its origin and the methodology behind it are not disclosed. 11th, response F68, that it will take anywhere from a few seconds to a couple of minutes to exit a prospective train station parking garage, is conclusory and not unsubstantiated by any analysis. What is known from the analysis is that it estimates that it takes 29 seconds to exit the train station at the corner of Woodbury and Greeley, whereas other reliable sources are on the record estimating it at 10 minutes. 12th, the original and authoritative source for census data is from www.census.gov, not from www.usa.com. The most up-to-date census numbers as of 2019 rather than 2014, as the response claims is provided by USA.com, show that there are no zero-car households in Chappaqua Hamlet, not a single one. Please ensure that any references to census data are up-to-date, accurate, and authoritatively sourced. 13th, response F116 contains a conclusory and unsubstantiated statement that increasing the town's population by roughly 10% will have no effect on parking at the town's parks. No analysis is presented to support this statement. 14th, the trip reductions asserted, which range from 2% to 20% for transit travel, are sourced from work travel mode shares, but they are applied to all purposes of travel. This is aggressive because transit mode shares are consistently much lower for non-work travel. 15th, and we're only going up to 16. 15th, the responses present a tripling of pedestrian traffic conflicts, which is not conservative as is asserted because population would increase by 8 or 9 times, not 3 times. 16th, and finally, no response is provided to the comment that the comprehensive plan sets a goal to alleviate traffic congestion while this project undeniably worsens it. To summarize, the reasons that we experience traffic, but the traffic study says that we don't, are a series of aggressive decisions and assumptions in the traffic study. I'm happy to provide further particulars in writing. However, please understand that there's an enormous amount of content to be sifted through in a very short period of time. So thank you, and Christine, I'll get these one. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Anyone else, please? One second, Carrie.
Hi, my name is Margaret Ferguson. I have a question. I believe it's comment L5 or answer L5. It says the town board disagrees with the premise of the comment, i.e. that the proposed action promotes, quote, large-scale development, end quote, and, quote, high-density uses, end quote, that are, quote, out of character with the existing character found in the hamlet. Is that a true statement, that the town board disagrees with that statement?
That is not true for me.
Disagree with that statement, correct?
You disagree with that statement, but this is a document that came out, well, you know, the middle of the day yesterday, I guess. You haven't voted, you haven't deliberated, you got 4 people, you all agree, this is speaking for all 4 of you?
That's not the question. You want a question of adequacy, please?
I'm saying, is that an accurate statement?
You're not going to have everyone agree. Clearly, Lisa's not going to agree on anything. So.
That's not true. I'm
so-
very collaborative.
But this is a,
And Jeremy, this is not supposed to be a confrontational.
if I may, this is an official document and it's speaking for the town board, I don't think that's an accurate statement.
I think it's fair. But
It's
I
not
appreciate it.
accurate.
Okay, that's fine. I
So,
understand.
when I read this, I interpreted this to be summarizing the purpose for this town board initiating this action. That the goals of the comprehensive plan were not currently being met by current conditions, hence the desire to pursue an alternative zoning and environmental impact
Correct.
initiative.
Right, and just by way of clarification, I think this should be obvious, but the town board themselves are not actually drafting these responses.
Well, that's, I took that to be the
Let me
case.
finish.
Yes,
If
I will,
if
but I
may.
took that to
So
be the case.
The responses, which are voluminous, are being drafted by the consultant. At that time, at that point, they go through a number of levels of review. So Sabrina and staff in her office will look at not all responses, but responses within the particular expertise of a particular staff member. My office will look at responses, and we do our best to reflect in the draft responses what we think where the consensus of the board is. So with a comment that characterizes the proposed action as something that would lead to high density development, I think is what the comment
Well, it says, I'm reading from notes, so I may not have it exactly correct, that the proposed action promotes,
the exact comment,
I think it's L5, large-scale development and
Right,
high-density uses.
so we know that, at least I think the person who wrote that response assessed that the town board wouldn't agree with that characterization. And I'm guessing from the answers that I'm hearing from the town board that we got it right. So that's the exercise.
Well, I guess I'm asking just from a democratic Robert's Rules of Orders perspective. Is it that the consultants make this determination even though there's at least one town board member that doesn't agree with it?
Again, the responses are drafted based on what the consultant team and others believe would best reflect the town board's consensus. It is a board. I mean, the responses
understand
can't reflect the opinion of any single person. So, they're drafted with the expectation that we reflect, again, where the sense of the board is with respect to these comments.
It is also important to note that this is a completeness review, not whether or not you agree with this statement at this point.
I don't think they can hear
I
you.
said that at this point, it is a completeness review. It's not a review to determine whether or not you agree with the statement or you think it's right. It is whether or not the question has been answered.
But I guess, Maggie, I got to interrupt you for a second.
Yes.
I guess, and honestly, I missed this when I reviewed it, but the answer, the town board believes the proposed FBC would preserve the existing character of the hamlet, is not an answer for the consultant. Like, I actually don't agree with that, and I don't know that, I don't know what my fellow town board members believe, but even if we all did believe that, that's not an answer. Like, an answer from a consultant is to show us how it will maintain it, not the board thinks it's fine. That's not really an answer.
I would also like to say that it creates the impression that there's unanimity on the board. We're down to 4 out of 5 members, and one of the 4 I don't think agrees with this, and I think that's misleading statement. That's my point. That's why I'm talking about accuracy in that comment.
Thank you.
A minority
Was there-
voice still has a voice.
Okay. Did you have an additional comment?
Yes, I do. Then, in terms of various things that were said about parking tonight, there's some of the parking toolbox is parking on the streets, parking overnight in the lot. Residents, for at least wintertime, right now are not allowed to do that. So to me, that seems like an inadequate answer when people express concerns about the parking solutions to not note that this town board has already decided that residents can park in the street and can park in the commuter lot overnight in the wintertime. It creates a lot of problems for the function of the town. It costs more to plow. So I don't consider that an answer. I have a question about what if the contract to have a lot a mile away or quarter mile away expires in 2 years? What happens then? I mean, is there a requirement that it be locked up for 15 years? The satellite lot. I mean, is there a requirement that it be locked up for 15 years?
There has to be a documented, either documented ownership or a long-term lease agreement to lock up the property as long as the use in the hamlet is going to remain. So it's not something that you can say, I have a 2-year contract, that's not acceptable.
Right, so, but does it say that? Because I agree with you. If you have a building, it's going to have a life of decades. And if you have a contract, it's a matter of agreement how long that contract's going to be. So what happens if the contract expires? I'm just going to use
The project won't be approved. If you cannot demonstrate adequate parking, the project will not be approved.
Well, no,
Does it
she,
say
she
what
actually
time
has
period?
a good point, and this might be something that you would do, like if you build a building and the developer did
Yeah.
buy, let's say, a lot to do this, and it was all kosher and worked. Is there anything to put in a deed to prevent that person from later, after the building's built and everyone's moved in and they have their CO, to prevent them from selling the parking lot?
Or they negotiate a contract for, I'm just going to use a number. The life of a building is, 40, 50 years. They're going to
That we should
negotiate a
make sure
contract
we-
for 10 years. And it doesn't say, if I'm missing it, please tell me I'm missing it. It doesn't say right now there's a specific duration of that agreement, that legally enforceable agreement or legally binding agreement for anything.
Is there something you can put in a deed?
Yeah, there are license requirements, there are deed requirements to ensure, as they are today, that property remains forever in use while the primary use exists. Absolutely.
But does it,
Only way
There's a
that
means
would
to do it.
work.
There's a means to do it legally.
but does,
Yeah.
I don't think
We do
it
it all the
says that
time,
now.
Okay.
I don't think it ties the legally binding agreement to any time frame.
We do not create codes which put those those timeframes in there. That's to be,
Okay, so then I'm wondering how it works then. If a private developer negotiates a lot up by Walgreens,
in order to seek approval under the form-based code, they will need to provide documentation that they have parking for their unit. That documentation, in a case where they have a secondary lot, will need to be secured in perpetuity while the primary use exists.
I don't think it says that, though. I
So
mean,
maybe we should change the language to make sure that's in there, because that's a good point.
So, but are you saying that's not something that would get written into the zoning change? That's
that
something that's
might-
written
that-
into the,
Right, I'd have to,
does that go in the finding statement? Where does that,
The code doesn't have that level.
no, but the code, Sabrina, I can't think of a code provision that now speaks in that level of detail, but the planning board, for example, routinely attaches conditions of an approval. And, with something like parking, which has to be provided in perpetuity, that would be linked to some sort of a deed restriction. So it
Got
would
it.
run with the land. It'd be a
so we
permanent
would need
requirement.
tools to
Absolutely.
define how one would guarantee the availability of parking over
Well,
time.
Similar to deed restricting an affordable unit, right? We don't speak to the process of how that unit is forever to remain affordable, but that carries on outside of zoning legislation.
does it now say does the law say it has to be in place in perpetuity? Does the proposed law?
The proposed law does not include language that says it has to be in perpetuity.
So how did we get to it being in perpetuity?
That occurs as part and parcel of being able to provide parking for the life of the development.
I don't think it says that, but okay. I think that's a big gap, to be honest with you. I would also like to correct a couple of things. On the modified teardrop, it wasn't just pedestrian safety. There was a crash point in front of or I'm calling it a crash point. I think the Department of Transportation uses slightly less obvious language, but it's in front of the curved building. That's my recollection. So it was both vehicular safety and pedestrian safety. And the pedestrian safety point was that the walkway from, I don't know what that curved building's called, was way too long. And the pedestrians would be in traffic, is how they phrase it, I think, for a long period of time. So if you're going to use that design, I don't know if you're talking about bollards or, I don't know what you would put around pedestrians, but it's not just pedestrian safety. It is the car safety too. So I think there was a significant whitewashing of what that modified teardrop was, because I actually was paying attention to the hearings when that was discussed. And New York State DOT trashed it, just so to make clear. If we're talking about redoing that intersection for 5 years, Lord help our downtown merchants after all the construction goes on here. Then I would also like to say that, there's been talk about tonight about how long it takes to get anything done in Newcastle. The town board made a decision not to study alternatives, not to study different zoning techniques, not to study amendments to existing code, not to study modifications to the planning board process or the public review process. Those alternatives are out there. It hasn't been studied. People should know that. We went from current process to this massive densification under the form-based code. There's lots of options out there. So some of the answers say the scoping document didn't study alternatives, and that's an answer, and that's really not an answer. If people think, isn't there something we can do that isn't this massive? And the answer is, yeah, there may well be, but it hasn't been looked at. And the answers in this document and the pages released say that several times. Is the regulating plan going to be in the form-based code? Excuse me. The regulating plan? It is, right?
It's part of the form-based
Right.
code, yes.
And it's 72 acres?
Yes, for the regulating plan.
So the regulating plan, which shows, because I have the section here from the draft GEIS, so this is still the case. The regulating plan amends the official town zoning map and establishes a dimensionally precise framework and regulator controls for the study area.
There will be amendments to the form-based code which reflect the decisions that the town board makes, both from the finding statement and the new direction. So the code has not been revised to date to reflect what the board is looking to do.
But the regulating plan is still going to be 72 acres.
There will be a regulating plan for 72 acres and an identification of the North Greeley area as the area to be mapped.
Okay, but the regulating plan is still going to have the force of law.
And I say that, I say that now, but that is subject to change at the time that we are redrafting the legislation based on the environmental findings.
Right, we're not there yet. So we had one workshop on the form-based code legislation, and we made some changes with respect to 5-story buildings. There's more work to be done, and that's a separate process that's still ahead of the board.
Right, but I went back and looked, and before, under the draft GEIS, the regulating plan was 72 acres, and I guess for lack of a better word, the zoning area was 72 acres. They matched.
And in fairness, it's a good point, and I think you may see changes yet with respect to fitting the regulating plan to the legislation that the board ultimately adopts. Again, we're just not there yet.
Okay. But I just wanted to clarify that it was still contemplating that, I'm not saying committing you to the form of the regulating plan or the precise words, but it is going to be, because it says the draft form-based code refers to the regulating plan.
The FGIS refers to the regulating plan for the entire 75 acres. How it ends up in the legislation, the actual code itself, is yet to be determined.
Okay, because I looked at the revised form-based code, and it does refer to the regulating plan.
Correct, because we are carrying through the environmental review on the same area that we did the FGEIS area is the same area as the DGEIS area. But that's not to say that at the end of the day, the draft code that the town board reviews is going to be that same area. We have yet to contemplate how best to implement that discussion, decision-making into the code.
All right, and then when is the seeker required written comment period, and how long is it?
Well, if we look at the calendar, or the schedule, the draft schedule, it contemplates potential vote on completeness on
September 30th, is it?
yeah, so, and then the findings, again, just looking at this draft schedule, you're looking at October 26th, so you're looking at, a substantial period of time between the potential adoption of the FGEIS and consideration and adoption of the finding statement.
Okay, so if
Far more than 10 days.
Okay, so you're saying, you're indicating, I don't want to commit you to it, but October 1, if we stick to this, you're saying October 1, and
I'm just reading the schedule and I count a lot of days, more than 10 between.
Well,
those two
I agree,
milestones.
that's
Yeah.
simple math, right? That would be nice, it's just that I'm confused because written comments I've heard are supposed to inform the findings, and if we have comments coming in from October 1, and then you have a work session 4 days later on the draft finding statement, so it's, and then you have a vote on the 26th, how does the written comments inform the findings?
Well, I mean, to be clear, there is no comment period with respect to the findings, right? There's an opportunity for interested
agree with that,
agencies
yes.
and people to comment in writing.
I agree.
Comments will be considered, obviously, but there's no comment period per se in the regulation.
But I've just heard said that the comments will inform the findings. Are you talking about comments that have happened to date, not the written comment period? Is that what's going
I
on?
presume everything that's happened up until that point will.
But then I just wonder how? How? If it's a tight time frame. I mean, you're having a work session 4 days after the written comment, or 5 days after the written comment period opens up. And even if it was a 10-day minimum written comment period, that would be in the middle of the comment period.
Look, again, there is no written comment period. It just doesn't, it's not a thing.
No, I know, seeker requires you not to go to findings for 10 days.
Right.
But it was promised that we would have a 10-day minimum legal written comment period. And that's normally where agencies involved or interested agencies weigh in. And I would think aside from residents wanting to know, I think the Board of Education wants to know, they put in a lot of comments, and maybe the fire department, the library, all these groups put in a lot of comments.
So,
And
Mr.
I'd
Arlene,
like to know.
I think your point is well taken, we'll discuss it more. It's very clear your position, I understand your position. I think we want to move this forward, we've been very
Well,
liberal
moving
in what
forward,
we
it's just that I
discuss it.
started asking this
I
on
get-
July 13th.
I get it, so that we'll discuss it internally. I've been very liberal because it's gone well beyond the scope. Many of these questions have gone well, or statements have been well beyond the scope. I was happy to deal with it, I'm happy to give you the forum, but we still have a mandate to do with, and a law to consider.
Well, you have
for
to understand,
masks.
this is a very
So,
tortured and chaotic
I understand, so he
schedule.
doesn't have an
Schedule. Let me
answer.
finish, please. This is a
Please.
very tortured and chaotic schedule for all concerned, not just residents. For very important entities such as the Board of Education and the library, we're not seeing this is just not, this is not the way to come up with a good end product, this schedule. So my point is that I first asked you on July 13th these very same questions, okay, 2 months ago, and there's still no answer. Aside from everything else that's going on with this schedule, people should have known long ago how long that written comment period is going to be and when it's going to happen. Is it the day after? Is it a different time period?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Ed Frank,
Just
New
so you
Stat
know,
Lane.
pardon me, I apologize, Mr. Frank. I'm going to shut this down, when I say shut this down, we can continue it another time or continue it later, but we have to move on to other matters, so we're going to do this till 8:50, so please go ahead.
So I can't hear you or understand you. What did you
So
say?
we're going to continue this open till 8:50, but then we're going to move on to some other matters, but there'll certainly be other
So
opportunities.
I have 12 minutes, you're saying?
That's-
Oh,
yes,
okay.
Everyone has 12 minutes.
Got it.
In
There might be
totality.
others who want to say something though, beyond you.
All right. So, comment F-35, that Chappaqua is located in a suburb that has very limited public transportation. The response to that is Chappaqua is provided with a good public transportation system, which includes the Beeline bus system. Well, maybe the consultants are not familiar with that bus line. The only Beeline bus route that runs through Chappaqua runs from Ossining to Briarcliff Manor to Pleasantville to Chappaqua to Mount Kisco to Katona on a 1 hour to 1.5 hour schedule, and service is provided for only half of the day from about 6:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. Apparently, the consultants who provided this unsatisfactory answer do not understand the meaning of a good public transportation system. Response F50, the biggest change since 1986 is the advancement of technology. The internet, personal computing allows people to work and shop from home. Well, that actually disputes the consultant's feet on the street mantra, excuse me, where they're saying that those are bygone days, thinking that more residential apartments in the hamlet will put feet on the street to bring more business to the hamlet. They claim that technology even reduced the need to own cars. Well, that may apply to cities like New York City, Boston, Philadelphia, or other places. It hardly applies to the Chappaqua hamlet. It's very difficult to live here without a car. And then they go on to talk about, consultants talk about car share, ride, hail, and smartphone apps providing an alternative to owning an automobile. I don't think very many people would live here without owning a car. Take a survey sometime. Parking, F35 response, parking location may be provided off-site within a mile radius for residential use categories if a shuttle is provided from 5 a.m. to 12 a.m. Well, why are the consultants imposing a 12 a.m. curfew on persons, especially seniors, that residential parking locations can be up to a mile away with a shuttle and with a 12 a.m. curfew? In other words, be back to your assigned parking spot by your 12 midnight curfew, or your punishment is walk back up to 1 mile to your apartment. That's outrageous. Do the consultants and others who support the form-based code believe that we live in an autocracy rather than a democracy, and believe that curfews are acceptable to impose upon persons living in an apartment in the downtown hamlet?
Mr. Frank, I don't think anyone thinks there's an autocracy. I'm not sure the consultants think that either. So can you please try to stick it?
Okay, structured parking. Structured parking is, according to consultants, is common in Westchester and has been around for many years in New York City and White Plains. This is a completely unreasonable attempt to compare the downtown Chappaqua hamlet to New York City or even the city of White Plains. Makes one think, how much do these consultants know about our hamlet? Comment F145. That during any proposals that might involve the train station parking lots, the development department will require applicants to provide sufficient temporary parking in the event that public parking is lost during the construction of a development. There's no answer to where will this temporary parking be located. No answer whatsoever. And then the consultants, excuse me, the consultants chose a 3-year study period for the number of accidents, saying there was only 2 accidents that involved pedestrians in the 3-year study period. If they knew enough about Chappaqua, unfortunately, we all remember when a pedestrian tragically lost their life at the northwest corner of North Greeley Avenue and King Street. I think residents of Chappaqua have an unalienable right to social justice and quality of life, and in my opinion, the form-based code infringes upon this right. Another thing.
Thank you, Mr. Frank. Again, we have 8:50.
Okay, let
Other
me
people
continue
waiting.
and you can talk later. At a
Mr. Frank,
recent
we're
town
gonna shut it
board
down at
meeting,
8:50.
a resident offered to volunteer to conduct a charrette for the purpose of enabling citizens, government officials, business owners, developers, planners, etc., to have a series of meetings to exchange ideas, make suggestions, obtain answers, and define a competent path forward. The resident did not receive a yes or no answer. I would like to volunteer to help bring businesses and people to the town, not only from Newcastle, but from other towns as
Frank,
well.
does this have to do with the adequacy? I appreciate your willingness to do that, but does this
What,
have to do with
I don't
adequacy?
understand what you're
Does this
saying.
have to do with the adequacy of what's been presented? I appreciate that you want to help bring things to Newcastle, but that's not what we're discussing right
Well,
now.
this is helpful to Newcastle to
I
bring
understand-
business.
I understand
It's the
that.
form-based code.
Mr. Frank, I understand that. We have about total of 5 more minutes, and other people may want to speak. So if you want to continue talking things about are not relevant to what we're discussing here and now, by all means do so. But
All right,
we're
so
closing out.
let me ask council, from this $1.5 million grant that was given to us, it was used for the basketball court, it was used for the kiddie park,
Mr. Frank.
and also for this facade improvement program. Is there any reason why we can't have a 50% benefit to a new business who comes here for 1 year to pay half their rent? Is there any reason that can't be done?
There is, right?
I'm not going to comment.
Okay.
You're not, well, there's no answer.
Um,
One
if
more
I-
thing,
I
Ed,
think I know
before
the
I
answer
sit
to
down.
that, but-
I don't think you have to
Ed,
reply
one
to
more
this.
thing. Is there any reason, any legal reason why this form-based code for 72 acres cannot be stopped right now and then restarted only for the 6 acres or whatever it is on North Greeley Avenue? Is there any legal reason why that
Thank you,
cannot
Mr.
be
Frank.
done?
Thank you, Mr.
You have an
Frank.
answer?
Thank you,
I
Mr.
didn't
Frank.
think so.
All right.
Certainly,
All
I
can
think
say,
that the
I'm hearing
process
a lot
is at
of
the discretion of the
nonsense.
There's a lot of
board.
stuff on
Whether you don't
discretion,
like
but thank
hearing
you.
that or not,
Thank you.
that's your problem.
That's all right. Thank you, Mr. Frank. Carrie, there's somebody online. Carrie, there's somebody online. Can you please let them in?
Sure.
Thank you.
Adam Storlow, just unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you. This is Adam Stallero from Cy Paget and Roselle on behalf of the Chappaqua Central School District. I wanted to echo what other commenters have said in terms of the timing for this review and for not only the time for the public to respond, but for involved agencies as well, or interested agencies, and also about the availability of documents. I think I heard tonight from Sabrina that Chapter 2E on infrastructure, which has the bulk of the comments that the Board of Education made, has been provided to the town board already. And so first I would request that it be provided to the public
it
as
has
well.
not.
It
It
has
has
not
not.
been provided.
Okay, I'm sorry if I got that wrong.
Yeah.
All right, so in that case, we have an even shorter amount of time to review this chapter between now and the end of the month, when the board is going to be considering whether to accept the FGIS as complete. So we would ask that we have additional time and adequate time to appropriately review and respond to the comments on that chapter. It sounds like the next meeting on the 21st will be for 2 other chapters and still not the infrastructure chapter. So we would be leaving, potentially a week for the discussion on the infrastructure chapter, and then for the board and its consultants to consider the adequacy and make changes to the FGIS between then and the 30th. So my request would be that we have more time than that to review and respond and get comments to you.
It is our expectation that the infrastructure chapter and the miscellaneous chapter will also be submitted to you for your discussion next week.
Thank you.
Right, but on the 21st or the 23rd?
On the 21st.
But would be made available to the town board, the public, and interested agencies this Friday. That's
Okay, great,
what we're
thanks.
shooting for.
Thank you. All right. Listen, you're here, so let's...
5 seconds.
Yeah, absolutely. By all means, let's finish up here. Go ahead.
Arthur Grant, 24 Glen Terrace, Chappaqua. Start your stopwatches. I support the form-based code. Thank you.
I'm just curious, do you, because I'd like to hear that, do you have a reasoning?
I do, but I don't want to take up more time. I'm happy to email it to you.
I would love
Shut up,
that,
laugh,
thank
Adam, go
you.
ahead. All right,
Thank
go
you, I
ahead.
would love that.
Quickly, go ahead, thank you.
I'll try to be very quick. Just
Can you beat that?
oh, what's that?
The last one?
I cannot beat that. I mean,
Wait,
I
go
could
ahead.
say I don't support the form-based code, but I have to give some more reasons. Roger Klepper. I've brought up the topic of traffic, I think, a number of times. And I don't have the technical expertise that Scott does, but I actually did study traffic once. And, just conceptually, to me, traffic it's a function of, the volume of your roadways and the volume of traffic and what you can support. And what I'm hearing is that there's this is something where I think we kind of have to have zero tolerance for or zero uncertainty. I think there's other topics where we're sort of doing some hand waving, saying, okay, well, if there's insufficient parking, then maybe that will limit the max build out, and that's kind of rationalization that we might say is okay. But traffic, if we're going to put in a finding statement which says that certain things are approvable, right? Then it can't be subject of hand waving or rationalization. We have to say we have identifiable specific things, and there can't be uncertainty around the teardrop. If that's really, really important, then we can't live with uncertainty. Because our town, it's a Pyrrhic victory. If we, all of a sudden we have a much more vibrant hamlet, but we have to think about traffic if we're going from one place to another, because we have a layout that is very, very constricting. So, as you do this and as you take your next steps, and I think I've discussed the legal ramifications of the finding statement, the one thing we've talked about is that, I think it's a common theme that shows up in the comments is that we would have traffic issues anyway. But the difference is in the world that we're dealing with right now is that if a developer comes in with a project that creates a traffic issue, you do an EIS at that time, right? And you have the ability to vet those traffic issues at that time. Right now, if we file a finding statement, we're saying that 1,000 units would result in traffic that is approvable. So when you're doing that, think about what does that mean for the future? Like, let's say we don't want, we're doing just North Greeley right now. And let's say we say, okay, we don't want to do the full 72 acres. What does it mean if we've done that finding statement and said 1,000 units and that traffic is approvable? What if someone then comes to us and says, oh, I've got this massive project. I understand that this is going to create big traffic issues. But I've got a lawyer who will pick up that finding statement that you filed and say, it's much less than what that was, so you can't say no. How are you going to defend yourself? When it comes to any issue regarding traffic, if you file that finding statement saying 1,000 units is acceptable. If you're messing with traffic in our hamlet, it's a really, really critical thing. Like there has to be zero tolerance for any uncertainty there. And that's just think about that. When Scott talks about his much more technical, specific assumptions, those are really, really, really important things. Okay? So you need time to go through them. These aren't, this is important stuff. Okay? So that's all I really want to say. Thank you very much.
Online, go ahead. Carrie?
Sure, hold on. Michael Weinberg, open your line. Michael, you just need to unmute yourself.
Hey, Ed, can I ask a question while we're waiting for Michael? Remember at the beginning of this, we talked about making sure like the planning board, we got their input, and have we contacted them? No. Can we make sure that they look at all this? Because I feel like they're a big portion of determining if this is adequate.
I think what we talked about was doing that on a question by question or a comment by comment basis, as opposed to inundating them with all of this paper. So far, we haven't really heard a consensus for sending a particular comment to the planning board.
I
Right, you
think
certainly
any
can send.
comment that they ask, they should be, I mean, yeah, I can send it to them, but as a part of the process, I would think we would be asking our planning board if this was complete. I just want to make sure.
If Mr. Weinberg is not available to speak, I think we're going to move on.
Yeah, he put his hand down.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Jeremy, I just had 30 seconds. It's literally 1 point because I spoke for Bruce.
Literally, go ahead. Go. You're
Okay.
done.
It gets to completeness, and excuse me, Ben Herman again. It gets to completeness, and it's just one remaining point that I had from my list. The parking ratio reduction that the consultants have relied upon is based on what appears to be a national handbook and not observed conditions here in Chappaqua. That's not a complete analysis of parking needs here in the hamlet, and I would urge you to do a proper analysis because of the concerns expressed in the comprehensive plan. The topographical challenges here in the hamlet, the average median income, and the traffic patterns here are not consistent with what you would see in other suburbs that those ratios are based on. I think the parking ratio reductions are setting us up for problems as it relates to parking. Thank you.
Ben, quick question for you before you sit down, I'm sorry. When you finance a property, so for example, a big project, I don't know, you're talking tens of millions, I have no idea what you're talking about. But when people are concerned about the parking lot, and please tell me, would you finance a parking lot that was not zoned for residential, knowing that there's also a permissible referendum, without knowing in advance that there would be a zoning change or what the community's input was? Would you give money to a developer? Would you finance that developer? Or would you say, no, I gotta make sure there's a zoning change and that there's a likelihood of your success?
I have no idea. I think there are a lot of hypotheticals there, and I think we're talking about a very unique situation.
Oh, all right, I'm
I think
surprised.
Summit Greenfield had
You really,
money before their
you'd
zoning
finance
changed.
a project? All right.
And
It's okay, you don't have to answer.
I'm thinking, I'd rather give the planning board everything and let them decide if they want to read the whole thing, as opposed to us deciding what they should read and not.
So it's
It's
all
just sending them
available to
emails.
them. Is that
But
not?
we should be proactively looking to our planning board instead of hiding it and saying, oops, you
Who's
didn't look
hiding
at
it?
it, sorry.
I don't know that
People
we're
are
hiding
saying it's
it from
difficult to
anyone. It's
find.
publicly
But if the
available,
planning board
right?
can't find it, that's problematic on a whole separate level.
And,
very
and
easy
their
to send it to
feedback is
them.
not a prerequisite for our current process, is that also right? Okay,
Well,
thank you.
right, doing what's required by
Okay,
law and
so-
what's right are two different things.
All right, so let's adjourn to, oh, pardon me, you go through administrative items?
Yep, we have a couple of administrative items, okay? Sorry, can you hear me now? Okay, great. So for our administrative items,
Thank you, Serena.
Thank you.
Sabrina,
Thank
the
you.
Hudson Wellness.
Oh. What was the question? Do you want me to update it?
Yeah, just to update the board really quickly.
Okay, so the Cortland Planning Board adjourned the public hearing. It has been moved. We are in the process of reviewing the environmental documents submitted by the applicant that are consistent with our earlier letter that we had provided to the town of Cortland asking for specific information regarding traffic, stormwater, and then there was the groundwater. And the applicant, we are reviewing their information to determine whether or not they've addressed our concerns and provided information for us to consider our comments in. You should have a summary of our findings for your consideration as soon as we have an opportunity to fully review their documentation and make a determination. It may revolve one of two ways. It may satisfy our concerns, or it may generate another comment letter from your board to the town of Cortland. We haven't missed any opportunities. As I said, the public hearing has been adjourned. So we are still tracking to get you information shortly.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you for that update.
Have a good night. Safe home. Okay, we've got just monthly reports for August, authorization for our assessor to attend a conference, authorization to repair the Art Center walkway, it's for $6,865. TDM Landscaping and Masonry Corp. Were the lowest bidders. We'd like to try to solicit bids for 2022 for the Art Center and Community Center busing. As it turns out, Chappaqua Transportation has told us that busing is available, will be available for our students. The problem is that when we initially set up scheduling for our Art Center programs, that was not the case. So we pushed our programming back to allow parents to be able to pick their kids up from home and then drive them over to the Art Center program. So what resulted was an untenable gap. You're talking about kids being unsupervised for an hour before their program started. And when we actually did the math, we found out that it was a $30,000 plus contract, and we have to go out to bid. So we're hoping to set it up so that we are ready to go for January, so winter and spring programming and all through 2022. So again, hopefully a step in the right direction.
And Jill, how is that paid for? Are we paying for all that? I'm assuming the parents are
Parents will be
giving
paying
money.
for it. Yeah, the parents will be paying for it. Also, there's been a significant increase in the price per trip.
Yeah.
Again, that's that's between Chappaqua Transportation and them, not ours. And just another sign of the times, it turns out that the entertainment company that we had engaged for the Ragamuffin Parade, because they're having trouble with staffing, they can't actually staff our event.
Oh, no.
So we are doing a rush job to see if we can go out and solicit bids for yet another entertainment.
For which
company.
entertainment?
For the Ragamuffin Parade, little rides and
the rides.
Oh,
activities
the
they have
rides.
ahead of
Got
time.
it.
Popcorn.
Okay, there is a, we're actually going to table the NCC MC late edition. That'll be on for next week. The approval for the banner request, that's for the Chappaqua Children's Book Festival. It's also for 6 lamppost signs. So they're going to get the date changed and put them up around town.
Great.
And last but not
And are
least,
they paying for that, or are we? Because we're sponsoring.
we're co-sponsoring it. They create the sign. We don't. We just are.
Okay.
Hang it.
Yeah. And the last is the resolution in support of a NYSERDA grant so that we can submit for our EV chargers. And we're going to be tabling the building permit request as well. So that'll be on for next time as well. Okay, and that's it for our work session, and we're ready to move into our...
And Jill,
Yep.
just, can we take off the consent agenda hiring of the police officer? Because I always feel like we
Yes,
should
and
do
just
that
it in a separate
separately.
resolution.
Yeah.
Sure.
Motion to adjourn and
Go into our...
town board meeting?
town board meeting.
So moved?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I hear it. Oh,
Sorry, that's good.
there you go.
I think we got it all in favor and everyone gave an aye.
I seconded that.
Okay, good.
All right, so any announcements, Jill?
Just a couple, I'm sorry. So in addition to Hurricane Ida just wreaking havoc on our downtown and really just testing the mettle of our merchants and residents, we have some damage in and around town. The path through Greeley Woods has been closed. There were some significant trees that came down from Chappaqua Central School District property to the church across the street, damaged their swing set. Another dead tree came down across our path. There's significant erosion on the path itself. We've had staff go out and take a look at the trees. We've identified about 14 dead trees that have to come down along the path. So until that path is safe, it's going to be closed. And we appreciate the fact that it's an inconvenience. I know that the kids use it to walk from Bell School up to the synagogue. We've notified the synagogue. We've notified Chappaqua Central School District until we can make it safe. That
How
no
do
one
we
should be walking.
close the path?
We have put caution tape and bollards in the front and in the back of it. So the access to the synagogue
Yeah, but
There's
Are you
nothing I
going
can
so
do
much
about it.
Okay.
Right, it's the
mean,
woods.
I mean,
It's-
perhaps,
Right.
Jill,
it's
I don't know
woods.
if this would be helpful, but do we want to send out a text or put it on the bell sign? Maybe the.
I
I
don't know
could-
that
traffic
everybody
sign?
knows what it's called, so
Well,
that's
I
my-
think we should maybe let the Bell parents tell the PTA to put it in the newsletter that
That's
walk.
why I was
Could
hoping
do that.
the
Lisa,
path-
do you have a contact there? 'Cause I don't know
Yeah, I
anyone
do.
there. Okay. So
I
why
do.
don't
That's
we do
fine.
that?
I obviously
That's
I
a good idea,
contacted
Laura.
CCSD administration. And also our Duck Pond pedestrian bridge along 117. We have we hired an engineering firm to come out on an emergency basis to take and do an evaluation for us, give us a report. And we're hoping to get it within the next week or so we know whether or not there can be a repair or replacement. But again, just have to be really careful. The floodwaters took and affected the integrity of the structure. So again,
So Jill, is it possible, I don't know if any of this has sort of been aggregated, but to just sort of get a summary of impact of that particular storm in the
gosh, these are
town?
not the only ones. These are just the most.
Right, no, I know,
recent
and I think
ones.
it's just good for us to, we may not have an answer to it, but to really kind of have a better understanding of the scope of impact to the downtown. Were there impacts in Millwood that I just hadn't heard about?
I
we're
can
aware
ask
of
I can ask DPW.
damage
They're
to our
just
parks,
they're
as you're
they're
saying.
sort of busy and inundated with, all the.
But at
all the
some
things
point,
that
we'll
they're
have that
doing.
information because,
Yes, because we're
because we're
trying-
going to try to get reimbursements.
Right.
From
if we-
FEMA, so
Yes.
we will have an absolutely comprehensive list of all
Okay.
of the damage and our repairs, because we are keeping photos and detailed invoices on what gets spent and.
Do we get, so then if residents had flood damage in their homes, does that get included in that too?
No, not in the towns, but there is individual, Jeremy had posted
Individual assistance.
online, all sorts of individual assistance.
But the downtown businesses were profoundly affected, and they lost a lot of inventory.
Yep. No, they
Yeah, for
absolutely
sure,
did.
and that's, I think we just wanna, it would be helpful, I think, for me to just have a vision of like flooding extended from here to there and encompassed these buildings, and these guys didn't flood, but these guys did, and it'd be good
Or down-
to
yeah.
have a bit of a post-game.
Got it.
All right, I have no supervisor's report now, and I assume you are not going to give an administrator's report? All right. So hopefully there's not much public comment, sir. Not for you? Oh, my gosh.
I'm only here to help.
Wait, can I just make one quick public comment? I have to send you, Ed, I've been researching sign ordinances since there have been so many issues about it. And I found a phenomenal one, so I want to look at it a little more, and I'll send it to you. And if you think it's doable, we can maybe send it to the board and see what everyone thinks.
Happy to work on that with you.
Okay.
The only public comment I think that should be noted is that we do have Community Day coming up.
Yeah.
And hope everybody will come and have fun.
Thanks for pointing that out. That should have been actually said. I appreciate that. This
If you
Saturday.
want to say that again, because he's not on.
This Saturday, Community Day. Come join us, please,
10 to 2.
at the train
Sponsored by the
station.
Rotary Club.
All right, Mr. Gottlieb.
Yes, Warren Gottlieb, a Plymouth Road, Chappaqua. I just wanted to follow up on one thing. I came, I think it was about a month ago on this. I know this is not the first thing on the top of your minds, but just heading into the cold weather months and the uncertainty we're seeing with COVID, and also seeing, I did see the governor signed a certain law with respect to open meetings. I do really think this issue of Zoom protocols and how we handle meetings, really, I know like for today and tomorrow, we're fine, and maybe for a month, but certainly by Halloween, Thanksgiving time, I really think that's something the board should try and button down. There were 5 things I mentioned. I'm happy to email them to you. I'm not going to bother you with them again, but if we can do that, because I am worried that we may face that again this winter.
Yeah, Lauren, send that again, that would be great. I think there were some suggestions there that would hopefully be implemented if we had to go back to fully remote.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have some online?
Go ahead.
Hello.
Hi,
Hello.
we hear you.
Oh, good. Hi. Cynthia Moses from 100 Glendale Road. Hello at this late hour. I am calling from the West End. I'm thrilled to see that Sabrina put an update of the Hudson Wellness Center on your agenda. I think it's incredibly important, just the way you are worried about stormwater and traffic and so forth in Chappaqua, to be worried about that all the way on the West End with this project trying to get its approvals from Cortland. I want to remind Newcastle that the same owners own over 20 acres of Newcastle property adjacent to the property that they claim is the only property they want to develop. And I would like to propose that you offer an agenda item for the West End on your upcoming, schedule, to be able to hear from the West End about concerns that might not be so obvious, to Sabrina relative to the rest of us paying attention to the progress of this project. And while they did postpone their meeting, they've decided at the planning board level in Cortland to have a special meeting to review this project on Tuesday, October 5th at 7 p.m. So it is scheduled, and that leaves 2 meeting sessions or cycles for the Newcastle Town Board to hear from residents from my area before that meeting to help supplement your information and consider the concerns of this area with regard to that project.
Cynthia, I'd encourage you, which you no doubt will and have in the past, I'd encourage you again to email us, the town board, and whomever you speak with, to do the same. I think Sabrina's done a good job in keeping us informed and trying to have us as proactive as we can be. So however you do it, I think an email is certainly a great way, because then if it needs to be forwarded or just cut and paste within reason, it's very helpful to do it that way.
Would you consider hearing from the West End about, our concerns?
Anyone could always come in. I know 100%. Please do. You feel free.
So what Sabrina just updated us on tonight would be coming back before the board in a work session. Is that right?
Well, I don't know if it's in a work session. No, necessarily. Yeah.
Whenever she gets information.
Well, she updated you.
Right, but I don't know if it's a work session. You mean like a
She was just saying, right, that they're expecting
Right, so
response.
we would expect a report from her in a work session coming up.
In
or
a work
town,
session,
whatever
so
it
then
is.
that would
Yeah.
be on the agenda, and then part of the public
Yes.
comment in that
Yeah.
board meeting
Yes.
is well open to anyone who's interested in that agenda item, right?
Sorry, I misunderstood. I think meant there's a work session item we were discussing amongst ourselves, but in terms of, no, okay, 100%. I think that's pretty smart to do it that way.
So
But I think it's good.
tonight's
So what
comments
Cynthia
were
is
part
saying,
of your
right,
work
is there's some,
session.
sorry, hold on just a sec. So I think
Yeah.
what she's saying is there's some time sensitivity for that to be on the agenda.
I got it. And we'll talk to
Exactly.
Sabrina about it, but go ahead, Cynthia.
So that's exactly right. There are 2 more Tuesdays before the special meeting in Cortland.
Got it.
Where if you have it in your work session like you did tonight, the community from the West End and the people who care about these roads and the water and so forth can listen to what you have to say in the work session and hang on to be part of your public comment like I am tonight after the work session. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yep.
Yes, but I would also suggest before you hang up that you send an email. I think that memorializes it so much more efficiently on such a short notice, short amount of time.
Okay, happy to do so, and happy to let others in this area know as well that they could send emails with their concerns. And speaking of that, I did not send you an email from roughly a month ago when I brought up Sunshine Home issues like cutting down trees with no permit, and then getting a slap on the wrist and getting told that they had to send out a certified letter after the fact to neighbors to let them know that they were asking for a tree permit, even though the trees had already come down. And there are a whole lot of other issues that are coming to the forefront in the West End as they progress. I'm wondering, at one point, Sabrina offered a town hall update for the meeting, for the project. And I'm wondering if you would consider doing another town hall. It's been a long time. They've had to come in front of various committees or boards to get extensions on their original approvals and so forth.
So-
Would you
So
consider?
I don't think that, I certainly don't have no objection to it, but I think that'll be a decision of whomever the lead agency is to do that.
This has not
zoning
been
board.
something that we've looked at in some time. The zoning board of appeals was the permitting agency on
Right,
that
so
project.
I would tend to think that's probably the route to go, and maybe reach out to Sabrina and them, okay, perfect. But
We'll reach out to Sabrina and get an update on that as well.
So, so is that something that we could have, a partial sort of joint session with the zoning board to get an update on the project, and the town board kind of understands what's going on?
So
too?
I just need to understand where we are in the project. I know that the zoning board is the permitting agency, and Tom DePole would be the person who is monitoring the progress of the project. So I would think that Tom and Sabrina coming in to update the board as far as where the project is, what is the status of the current permits, and where they are in the schedule of completion would be a more valuable tool rather than the zoning board.
Got
at this
it,
point.
okay.
That makes a lot of
That's
sense.
good. And then that, again, can be on the agenda?
Yes,
And then the
absolutely.
people
Yeah,
who
and maybe
are,
we'll try to do it if it works. The wellness center, according to Ms. Moses, has that date set. So if that's okay, that's my priority.
Sure.
To make sure, because Sabrina didn't mention that in her summary tonight, and I want to make sure that she's aware of that date, because it did appear that she was waiting to receive information from them, or at least review the environmental reports to see whether or not they satisfied her inquiries and her concerns that had been expressed to Cortland. So I just want to make sure that, it may be that she's aware of the date and she just didn't mention it because she's planning on following up by then, but I just want to make sure that that date doesn't pass without us taking note of it and making sure that if there are additional comments that need to be filed, that we file them.
well,
Okay.
I sit corrected as opposed to stand corrected, so we'll do it here. Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll take, thank you. Thanks for
makes
bringing it
sense.
to our attention. We
Thank
very
you,
much
Cynthia.
appreciate that.
Sabrina, thank you. Thank you for getting in touch with Sabrina. I appreciate that. And I appreciate your interest in kind of taking another look at where we're all at with Sunshine Home, including if you could please look at your own, projects of interest and update. It really has not been updated in so long, like the extended permits and things like that are not up to date on that page on your website. So that would be very helpful to the West End also.
Okay.
And maybe even involving the Millwood West End. I think you all are trying to get them revved back up as a committee or board, sub-board. Maybe they could be involved in this process as well to see what's going on. Would be great.
Cynthia, they are, and I've been in touch with Nicole about it, and I'll follow up with her again.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Okay. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead, Rob.
Okay, I'm just gonna minimize you. Okay, thanks very much. I didn't want to ask this previously because I don't think it was an adequacy and completeness question, so I wanted to wait until now. I hope that's okay.
Go ahead.
I didn't want to raise this question before because I didn't think it fell under the category of adequacy and completeness. I wanted to wait till now.
Yeah, go ahead, Rob, go ahead, please.
My understanding of the current proposed plan is to limit the application of the FBC to the North Greeley corridor. There have been various statements by parties and elected officials that seem to be supportive of the current proposal, that there will be some sort of amorphous period, which I don't know what that means, of time before evaluating if it is appropriate to expand the area of application of the FBC to other parts of town, other parts of the study area. My question.
I'm sorry, I'm jumping for a second. I don't recall us discussing legislation and expanding it beyond the North Greeley corridor, and so I don't know where you got that. I'm not familiar with this town board ever contemplating that after we've reduced it to its current location. And
Well,
please, someone correct me if I'm wrong.
I have heard comments from various. I can't speak to them specifically. There have been comments made that the reason why we're still studying, one of the ways we're still studying 72, but we're going to limit it to 6, is that at some period in time in the future, there could be the possibility for it to be expanded into other areas if that was appropriate.
Yeah, that's
I
true.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Okay, so you're saying more generically as opposed to saying we're going to now move it to Lower King or something. I get it.
No, you don't. So generically, there's a process for that happening.
I understand. I apologize.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No problem. So what I wanted to inquire about was what was the range of options that exist, and I guess this is kind of a question for Ed, if you'll let him comment on it. What is the range of options that exist to kind of legislate exactly how that works, rather than kind of rely upon the stated intentions of any kind of elected officials, whoever that might be at whatever point in time. You know, whether that's kind of after X many units are developed in the North Greeley corridor, after so much time has passed, you know, there are lots of iterations here, but I'd rather kind of see a legislation of this as opposed to kind of just some future board will decide when they feel the kind of the time is right, and you know they'll know what it is. I think, you know, even though I am not a supporter of the current proposal, I'm trying to kind of look forward to the extent that this is adopted by the town board of how this piece of it would work, and to the extent that it needs to be addressed up front, whether it's in the acceptance of the FGIS or whether it's in the finding statement, or I don't know where exactly it goes to be most effective, but I think this is something that makes sense for the community, and I wanted to kind of, you know, pose that question for discussion. Kind of in the same context, you could also look at, you know, what are the options that exist to kind of limit the finding statement to not bless the entire 72-acre study area and only the North Greeley corridor. Look, I have great respect for the creativity of council, and I just really want to know what the potential options are out there, because I know this is an issue that, even though there was the FAQ out there, which maybe some people take comfort in, I personally wasn't one of them, but rather than just have to take comfort, this is another way to kind of create, you know, kind of a hard pass, you know, so to speak, that a threshold for what has to happen.
I think Ed has the answer to the. I mean, not answer. I think Ed understands the question.
I understand the question.
Yeah, I didn't mean to say
Cut
the answer
the
to the
chase.
question.
This town board can't legislatively bind a future town board. Can't be done.
So you're telling me that they said that, you know, that if there's no level of binding, there's no kind of threshold they can put in, say, we are, as part of our finding statement, we are admitting that we don't think that a future, that an assessment of how this works to be expanded can be done without X, Y, and Z happening. Or we believe that X, Y, and Z should happen as part of any kind of expansion process.
Well, you do get that with the thresholds, and you see that in various contexts where you'll have a threshold that says before any future expansion or change is contemplated, you've got to look at X, you know, whether it's traffic, whether it's a displacement impact, but you can't tell a future town board what it can't or can't do legislatively.
Because you think somebody would challenge that.
It's just not lawful.
And you don't see any way to kind of limit the actual finding statements, the language even in there saying, we're comfortable, but only to the extent of the 6 acres. We're not comfortable with the full 72 acres because of all the issues that have been talked about by, you can just look at all the people who are there tonight and ad infinitum going forward.
Rob, you have my answer on that. That's what it is.
But Ed, you can limit a finding statement, can't you? Not what you said, where you're limiting future boards and legislation, but can't you, if we're adopting a finding statement, we can put limitations on the finding statement.
Sure, and you'll have that. You'll have
Yeah.
that here. You'll have conditions at the end of the finding statement, with respect to thresholds, right? And if one of those thresholds is triggered, you'll have further review, depending on what we're talking about, traffic or some other impact.
But why can't? But you're saying one of those thresholds can't be the expansion of the actual area beyond, what's currently being legislated within a certain period of time?
The thresholds and the mitigations don't really work that way. They deal with environmental impacts, not a legislative change per se.
I think, Rob, because the whole 72 acres is being studied, correct me if I'm wrong, Ed, you can't adopt a finding statement to then limit it to the 6 to North Greeley. I feel like that's what he's probably getting at.
I'm hearing the question differently then. I'm hearing the question as, can't we have some sort of circuit breaker that says to a future town board, before you consider a legislative change, stop and look at these things. And we have that with respect to environmental impacts, but we can't tell a future town board not to do something.
But the environmental impact issues have already been signed off on here, right?
Not yet.
It's not that simple. I mean, they're under review. There'll be an FGIS and a finding statement, presumably.
Right, but if we were to get to the point in time where they were adopted, they would have been signed off.
Yes.
Right, so those types of circuit breakers don't exist anymore unless I'm missing something. Look, I'm trying to find a way to, get more people comfortable. That's my goal here. Rather than just kind of have it be something that people don't know what's going to happen and have to trust, the word of elected officials that we don't even know who they are yet, which to me is not the most comforting scenario. And I'm not even talking about people who may not even be, running in this election. It could be any who knows when it is.
Zoning change could be implemented, zoning change of any kind, right, could be proposed and implemented by any town board, whether it's a form-based code zoning change or a traditional zoning change.
Sure, and there's a process. There's a public hearing process that is required.
One public hearing is required, correct?
Right, and then that kind of gets to my point where I understand that the law does provide for certain things to have happening. I don't take a lot of comfort in just kind of the basic laws and what can happen to people. And we've had people, I'm not accusing anybody on the current board, but there have been board members during my residency in town who I've considered ideologues who are very focused on pushing a certain agenda. And if that person were to occupy the board again, I don't know exactly what would take place.
I understand, Rob. I understand your question. I understand your issue. I think Ed has done his best to try to answer it, and you certainly can continue that conversation.
Right, no, I hear you, but without that kind of thing, it becomes even more pressing for somebody like me who's less than comfortable to kind of press for the rejection of it, which I'd rather try and work with it and try and find solutions that kind of, make everybody happy, that we can all live with.
I understand that, and that's welcomed. Thank you, Rob.
Good enough. Thanks very much.
All right, we are closing unless there's, Carrie, we're all set? Thank you. All right. Moving on.
So I don't know if Gray is available. He's actually over at the ARB. We can kick this over a week. We could do it now without him. I can go look and see. Otherwise, we can start the discussion of the face coverings next.
It can hold. It can hold.
Yeah.
Thanks,
No,
Lori.
Urgency?
landmark urgency.
Okay.
All right,
The one
so-
thing I did want to say about that, though, is that, of course, then it should get pulled out of tonight's consent agenda. and it probably shouldn't be on a consent agenda,
Right?
because then I
'Cause you
won't be
can't-
able to vote on the consent agenda.
Good call. Good call. All right, so we're continuing our public hearing. Are we opening our public? No, we're continuing.
You did not.
We didn't open it?
haven't.
All right.
Yeah.
So someone go ahead, please.
Move to open the public hearing on our revised mask legislation. Oh, no?
Oh, no, I don't.
No.
Yes, we did, because she sat down. You sat down out there, remember?
Oh, right, and then Gray wasn't here.
Great. Okay.
Oh,
I can't move on that.
So go ahead, Lisa,
Can
go
we
ahead and
just
open it.
adjourn
Go
it?
sit down.
Okay.
Oh, I move to open the public hearing on the landmark designation of 586 King Street, and then to immediately adjourn it to next week, September 21st, 2021.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. So we have to open up this new one.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I move to open the public hearing on the revised mask legislation for Newcastle.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
All right.
Okay.
Kick it off.
This is a proposed local law that was introduced August 30th by Councilwoman Lori Morton. The idea behind the legislation is to take what's on the books now, which is a mask law that the supervisor can activate, but it has a mask mandate with respect to public and private property, both. And to update that and try to give the supervisor more options than just a mask mandate everywhere or nowhere. So in the legislation, you'll see where it deals with places of public accommodation, town property, outdoor spaces. And the idea is that in a post-vaccination world where we are today, we weren't there when the original law was enacted, we can be a little bit more nuanced and tailored with respect to a mask mandate than we were thinking a year ago.
And just so folks who are on the call, we're not officially enacting a mask law tonight. We're not talking about enacting a mask law tonight. What we're saying is if Supervisor Jeremy Salan wants, or pardon me?
Whatever supervisor.
Right, or whoever it is, would do so in that circumstance.
That's
correct?
exactly
Okay.
right. So the
Okay.
existing local law, the one that's on the books right now,
Yeah.
is enforceable when there's a local state of emergency declared with respect to a pandemic type condition. That's exactly how the proposed local law would work.
But this also allows for carve-outs when you apply it?
Right, so the existing law has some exceptions, the proposed law has some exceptions.
And can we pick and choose, or the supervisor, whoever he or she is, can pick and choose those exceptions?
Not the exceptions. The exceptions are generally applicable as this local law has been drafted. What the supervisor can pick and choose from is where and how the mask mandate is going to be implemented. So, outdoor spaces would probably be the most intrusive, if you will, probably a bad word, but I mean, that's the most vigorous or restrictive aspect of the mandate.
It's not like it was before where it was sort of all or nothing.
Exactly.
But so who would decide, like, I want it to apply to restaurants and stores, but not to gyms?
Well, places of public accommodation are going to include restaurants and gyms, as the law is written right now. But the
Okay.
supervisor would look at there are basically 4 tiers, if you will. Municipal property, places of public accommodation, public transportation, and outdoor spaces. And that could change. I mean, the board could decide that there should be a 5th, that we should change one of those 4 categories. But the idea is that the supervisor, through the declaration of a local emergency, can decide, okay, we need to activate A and B, but only those 2. Or, so there's flexibility.
Restaurants and gyms are in the same category.
Right, I think the concern
Yes, and I know there was some discussion at your work session as to whether gyms should be a carve-out because, in terms of impacting a business with a mask mandate, that's probably among, at least with restaurants, you can take your mask off when you're seating and eating, but it's awfully hard to do that, have a mask mandate and be at the gym. So I know there was discussion among the town board members as to whether or not there should be a further carve-out for gyms.
Right.
I don't know if that's something that we need to
Right.
revisit.
Right. I
as
can
the-
say, since then, I have gotten feedback from a number of gym owners and employees, and it's mixed. Talked to, been in contact with, say, about 5 different individuals, 3 different establishments. Some who were describing actually, their precautions, which are all looking good. But their inclination to abide by whatever the town legislates, and then others who expressed a real concern that requiring masks for exercising patrons would have a significant negative impact on their business, and kind of reiterating the robust negative impact that COVID has already had on their business.
So I think that if you're going to do it, the purpose of this is for the health and welfare of the community. So either you're going to do it or you're not going to do it.
I agree.
So I would support that it would include gyms. I, in fact, work out at Lifetime, and I wear a mask when I'm lifting, and I wear a mask when I'm doing cardio. It's not fun, but I do it. So it's doable. Maybe 1 or 2 of probably not many others. But so I just think it needs to be across the board, if that's our goal, which it is, which is the health and welfare of our residents. But I also would say, and I think we'd all agree, it can't just be thrown out there. We should be following what's going on in terms of spikes or no spikes and significant spread.
Yeah, I think that's where we get into a challenge, right? Because we are still in a region of high transmission. And if that is the criteria for implementation of the legislation, obviously it's up to the supervisor to determine that. Then that would mean that now is an appropriate time to implement it. So, if we're saying that we have a higher threshold for implementing it because the impact of it is more severe, because we would be including the gym, exercise use, then that might mean that we wait to implement it until things are more serious. Whereas if we didn't have that carve out, perhaps we might implement it sooner.
Right. So you're suggesting that we pass the legislation, but not actually implement the law.
Well, I do want us to pass the legislation. I'm just, participating in some discussion about its utility and the likelihood of us implementing it. If we think that, having, appreciating that there's going to be business impact of including gyms, that might increase the threshold for implementing it, meaning no action for some time.
Right.
Right? If we had different degrees of implementation, then, we might say, okay, well, this is what we can do now, and we leave gyms, exercise out of it. But we could implement it now so that when our kids are running around the stores downtown, people in those stores are wearing masks.
So that would require.
Do you understand what I'm getting at? I know I'm not
Saying-
articulating
seems
Is it a
arbitrary,
tiered
though.
implementation? Are you saying it should be
I don't know,
tiered?
it may be too complicated for this and for the public to understand what is or is out of scope, given,
Yeah.
Given the flavor of state of emergency might be too much complexity for this. I'm just expressing concern that if we make this new version too restrictive, that we will be less inclined to use it.
Okay, so I'm sorry to recap, and it's not because I'm being argumentative, Lori. I just actually.
No, I think it's a sticky discussion, and I think we.
So, are you saying that, okay, let's say hypothetically at one point, if the positivity rate in the town of Newcastle or even in the county is above 5%, then we institute a mask law for a certain group of businesses, but then if it's above 10%, the whole town is shut down. or not shut down, rather, sorry, wrong words.
Wrong
Wrong
words.
words, sorry about that.
Messed up.
All masks. Is that what you're recommending?
I am not really offering a recommendation. I'm expressing my concern
Okay.
about how we use the current draft of this legislation. I'm afraid that it's restrictive enough and impactful enough that we're not going to use it.
So this is my thought. One of the things I liked about the last law was we had something like definitive we could base it on. It was a state of emergency. When we passed it, we were going because there was a state of emergency declared in the state of New York. I sort of liked that, so it didn't put a subjective burden on whoever the supervisor is to decide who should be masked, who shouldn't, when should this happen, when shouldn't it, are we going to be the only town in Westchester or New York to do this, or are we not going to be the only town? It's sort of nice, like I like following what the school district does, where they said, we follow the Department of Health. And this way, nobody can question what we're doing, nobody can say we're being subjective. What they say we do is what we do, unless it gives them authority to change it. So I kind of like that. I don't love having to put a burden on a supervisor, and none of us are healthcare professionals, to decide.
I am an expert in
You're
this
not
area.
a doctor, though.
I actually am
You're
a
not
doctor.
a medical doctor. So
Just for clarification.
you're not a
the,
medical doctor.
The local
So,
law that's
but
on
my-
the books now
Yeah.
is actually tied to the supervisor's declaration of a local emergency.
Right.
I know it coincided last year with the New York state of emergency, but the local law wasn't written that way. The local law, as it's on the books now, leaves it in the hands of the supervisor
To declare the state of
lo-
emergency.
So that's actually not changing.
Okay.
And then I think
Even
there
so,
are.
I like putting it to a finite, like
Sure.
if the state or the county declares a local emergency, we should be declaring that same emergency, as opposed to just deciding we're going to be the only town in Westchester to put this in place.
So I think we have guidance that we can use to make it more objective, but it would mean implementing it now. The CDC recommends people to wear masks in areas of substantial or high transmission. That is Westchester County now.
That's gyms too, though.
Right,
It
but
is,
I-
that is, for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm in support of gyms. If you're gonna do it, you're gonna do it.
That's what I think. If we're going to do it, we shouldn't just, I mean, it's one thing to say inside versus outside, private home, but it's another thing to say, okay, you have to wear it in a store, but you don't have to wear it in a gym, where arguably the transmission
So
is
Ed,
higher.
you did have an exception that I thought was useful or could be useful in thinking about the gym question, and that is social distance. And it's not perfect for indoor spaces for long periods of time. But it is written into the current draft of the legislation that if you can maintain 6 feet of social distance, then there is an exception there. So if a gym facility was able to provide that, then they could have a context in which their patrons could exercise without a mask.
But then
and
so
be
could
consistent.
every restaurant and every store, every merchant store, they
It's
could
written
say
into the
stand
code. So
back.
did you want to change that part
No,
of
I'm
this
just-
legislation?
Lori, we don't need to be argumentative. I'm also giving my opinion, is that I guess it's sort of, maybe we do want to, if your goal in doing this is to protect the health of people, then maybe the 6 feet is appropriate. I'm just pointing out that it's not just a gym. I know you're very focused on the gyms. It's not just a gym that can be the 6 feet apart. You could have 6 feet apart in a restaurant. You could have 6 feet apart in a retail establishment. Then it's like you either do it or you're not doing it. So I'm fine if you want to say, as long as you can do 6 feet apart, then you don't have to wear a mask, but you have to realize that that's not just gyms. That's anywhere.
You realize that, yeah. Yeah, I think it's but I'm pointing out that that is in the legislation, if you had
So-
read it.
Yeah, that
So,
was that's in the proposed legislation, and that's also in the current legislation
Right.
that's on the books
Right.
now. It's
So-
It was in the previous legislation as well.
So
Yeah.
my suggestion is that we move forward with, my view, my suggestion is that we move forward with this. It allows the carve-outs, it's much more simple, and I don't think anyone, I don't welcome having to do it if I have to, because they're gonna have people on all sides, and I'm gonna be the bad guy, or the next person will be the bad gal, one way or another. So, but I still think we should move forward, and I think we should include gyms, so I support it in that
I do too.
fashion.
So in 86-5D, there is one clarification that I'd suggest the board makes. If you could look at that subsection. This is the one that, and this again is a carryover from the old or the existing local law. It says persons playing a sport or participating in a fitness class or recreational activity. I think we ought to add the word outdoors. That was really the intent last year when this was enacted. So I think we should add the word outdoors after activity, just to make it clear that this is the soccer field. This is not a gym, a spin class, etc.
Okay.
We do have spin classes outside though sometimes, Ed.
Nice.
Just saying.
All right, so you can just amend that
So if
with support of the.
it's not a substantive change, so if the board is inclined to do that, we can just amend the text. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Perfect.
So are we going to leave this open for public comments for a few days like we usually do?
I would.
Yeah. Right?
Okay, so there is public comment.
Yeah, great.
So you want to let someone in, please? Go ahead, Mike. You're on.
Yeah. Hi, guys. Mike Schoonmaker. Thank you for letting me speak tonight. I've realized that these meetings are a marathon instead of a sprint, and I've grown, have much greater appreciation for what you guys are doing after having participated in the full session tonight. So I'm curious. So, and I understand better now the intent of the law, and it seems like it's intended to provide for the supervisor to take action based upon events that may occur in the future. Is that the case, Jeremy, or is the intent that if we pass the law, you would exercise authority now to implement the law currently?
Well, fair question. I don't intend to do this across the board. Probably. Well, let me rephrase that. I don't intend to do this as soon as we legislate it. If that's your question. So no. But I don't know what tomorrow or the next week or the next month holds. So it's certainly here for a reason, that if I believe with whatever evidence is presented and whatever the state or county may do, that it can happen. Otherwise, we wouldn't be wasting our time doing this. I don't know when that will be, and I'm not playing, Mike. I'm certainly not playing games. I just don't know that answer. But I have no intention.
Right. Yeah. So and I appreciate that, but and I do also appreciate Lisa's commentary regarding, having some cover if the state and or the county did something. I do have a concern if we're the outlier and maybe we're not relying on kind of the best data. We don't have the best medical expertise. I mean, this is not an issue of first impression, right? I mean, we've seen, and it's been very public, New York City considered a mask mandate, right? And they looked at the data that they had and they decided that that was not appropriate and that the best course of action was to encourage vaccinations, which have proven to be highly successful at stopping the spread of the virus. And I shared with the town board, there was an article in the New York Times by David Leonard, and this was not an opinion column. He's a journalist for the New York Times, and I've been following him throughout the pandemic, and he's been level-headed throughout, and he's had criticism for, people on all sides of the political spectrum. And, early on when we didn't have vaccinations and people were not masked, there was criticism, targeted towards them. And then when we had the vaccines available, he was, arguing that people should get vaccinated because the data also supported that. Recently, the CDC has released data, and David, reviewed that data, and his findings from that were that in towns that are and regions that are highly vaccinated, such as Chappaqua, there's like a 1 in 10,000 chance that you could have a breakthrough infection, and if you extrapolate that over a 3-month period, it's only then it comes to the percentage where you have a 1% chance of infection. So I just want to make sure we're cognizant of the facts in our town and our region, and aren't making decisions that are based upon what we see in
Yeah.
Texas and Florida,
Right.
where we have some irresponsible behavior and people aren't doing what they should be doing in terms of getting vaccinated. And Jeremy, I've heard you loud and clear, and I agree 100%. We probably need to do a better job in our town, and 80% or whatever it is not good enough for us, but we've done a pretty darn good job, and we've put ourselves in a situation where we do have a protection from the vaccine. And you don't need to read that article to see this. I mean, you can look at recent events. The U.S. Open posted tens of thousands of vaccinated people that were unmasked, sitting shoulder to shoulder.
Right.
And there was no super spreader event.
Right.
Our hospitals are not overwhelmed. Similarly, Citi Field, Yankee Stadium, they actually even allow unvaccinated people into the stadiums, and we're not seeing that kind of those kinds of results as well.
I think, Mike, I can't tell you other than, I can't read the future part of me. I'm a little tired. I'm kind of jumping around here for a second. But, in good faith, I think anyone who's sitting in my position, whether it's Holly or Lisa going forward, no one's looking to just throw this down for the sake of it. I think if numbers start to increase locally, it certainly will be considered. And as Lori mentioned, the county is already in a dangerous place, if you will. But we can't just do this recklessly. The advantage New York City has, for example, I don't know if it's still on the books, you had to have your pass to get into like a restaurant.
Yeah.
Which you don't have here. But all in total.
But what could we not rely upon?
That would be too much.
Most people who live here have those passes.
Yeah,
Could we
but
not
can
do
you-
something similar?
Mike, can you imagine if we required our local businesses to say, no, you can't come in? That's not fair to them. I mean, that would be such an uncomfortable situation. It would be overly burdensome.
Jeremy, I think, and whatever, maybe I'm wrong.
Right, they make
I
it
think a
more
mask
personal.
mandate in this, let's say we did it today, right? So there will be some people who irrationally are just against mask mandates regardless, right? And they're not going to tolerate it. There will be some people who, okay, fine, I get it. But there is no doubt that there is a percentage of our population that is yearning for normalcy, right? And those people, so I'm switching to the merchants now, those people, whether they live in the town or whether they live in adjoining towns, they're not going to want to come to Chappaqua. And so the question then becomes, what level of deterioration in foot traffic will our merchants be able to tolerate, especially if we don't have the science and the data behind whatever we're doing?
Yeah, I have talked to a number of our downtown merchants, many of whom expressed desire for the town to pass the mask mandate, so there was no ambiguity in their stores. Talked to employees of downtown stores whose store owner does not require masks, but they're very uncomfortable because they work in that store all day and they're wearing a mask and they see kids coming into the store with.
No, I think
without
you'll find people on all sides of it, right? I mean, this is not an easy debate. You're not going to find universal agreement. But again, if we're talking about the merchants, you may have some people like this, right? For sure. And maybe there'll be out-of-towners who are attracted to the quote-unquote safety of Chappaqua. I suspect, however, that you will find more people who are unattracted to the increased restrictions in the town, especially if we were to enact it under the current circumstances where we still have a pretty low level of cases in the town, and then you have all the freedoms that one would want in a normal society in the surrounding towns.
I get it.
And let's not forget, booster shots are going to be available soon. And it's so funny, Lori, because I heard the exact opposite from merchants, that they didn't want to have the mandates because they felt some people came in, they just wear it if the client wants it, and if they don't, they let them not wear it.
Yeah, I did a lot of talking when I was going door to door after the flood.
So thank you, Mike. I appreciate your comments, and I'm sorry because my mind's a little bit all over the place. Ed, the current law still allows a supervisor to have a state of emergency.
Yes.
All right. So, Mike, here's the response to that. So, I think this is a much more liberal way to handle it, allowing for carve-outs. Whereas now, if I or in the future Holly or Lisa were inclined, it'd be a much more encompassing mandate while this allows a carve out. So this is certainly better, and nothing prevents us from continuing this conversation.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, well, maybe I'll
thank
make
you, Mike.
one last comment, and I
Yeah.
appreciate the time. But why do we need the blank check, right? Why could we not just wait and see if situations get worse and then pass legislation reflective of those situations?
I guess we can do whatever we want to do, Mike, but my argument would be, well, why not? Because this is
Jeremy,
so much
that's
better.
not.
Well, I can give you.
No,
I
I'm saying
can
this
give
is
you an-
better, is what I'm saying, Mike.
I
This
can
is
give you an
the
answer
better
to that
legislation.
because this process takes weeks to implement, and folks should already appreciate that because we've been talking about this for about a month. And so having the tool available to us when we need it, I would say, is a public health safety measure.
And Michael, don't forget, this legislation is already on the books. It's just a more restrictive form of this legislation.
It's less restrictive.
Right.
So, right, what's on the books is more restrictive than what's now. So I actually think this does give us more flexibility than what's currently on the books. Right now, Jeremy could declare a state of emergency and everyone's masked. But this new law just amends what's already on the books essentially and gives a little more flexibility. So you may say, yes, inside, no, outside. You know, it gives him a little more flexibility to declare where that is than what the current legislation that already exists does.
And that's why I said, why not? That was to my point, why not? Why wouldn't we do this? So anyway, Mike, for that reason, so we can carve out. So I appreciate all your comments, Mike. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Hello?
Hi, John, go ahead.
John.
Hi there, thank you for having me. John Garfunkel from Indian Hill Road. I appreciate the time, and I know it's so late. And so far, thank you, Michael, for saying what you did. I generally agree with much of what you said and won't repeat it. And I thank the board for explaining to many people that the legal, technical aspects that this law, we're just changing how the law is still in the hands of the supervisor to enact. I would say, observing this law, it does seem performative, and I mean that in the best sense. Like, I think a law like this would work, or the action, the executive action to take would work if it would trigger the same in surrounding towns. If other towns said, hey, this is a great idea, let's do this too. We are at a disadvantage if that doesn't happen, as Michael went into. So I had emailed earlier, I just want to expound, there are probably areas where we could also do performative steps, which I think have a better chance of catching on and making positive change. And by way of short example, today, if I want to go to a shop, haircut, restaurant, I want to know ahead of time what's their policies, how many of them are vaccinated. Today, I don't know. It is really difficult to find that information. So this is almost a market-oriented approach where people can determine this ahead of time. Perhaps 80% of the people in our community would choose to go to a place that had stricter policies, had 100% vaccination. I think it's fantastic that Chappaqua Schools reported that 98% of their staff have vaccinated. That should make us all comfortable. So we don't know that. I got a haircut back in May after I got my vaccine in a neighboring town and just happened to ask the haircutter, I just got vaccinated and I'm taking off my mask. And she said, well, I didn't. So she had a scissors in her hands. I was not about to get an argument, but that's information I wanted up front. So Westchester County had tried this Westchester with Care program a year ago, where they put together this guidelines and had stores put that sticker in their window and they had a registry. But if you have, that has kind of been under promoted and they haven't extended it to vaccines. I know we're all expecting vaccine mandates might come per the federal legislation, but there was just overturned, the healthcare worker mandate was overturned in New York. I would love to know that percent at Caremount or any dental practice. So I asked this question 4 months ago. I posed it to county and state officials. I heard back from our county legislator, said, well, this is complex. I don't know if we can do that. I kind of wish we got the ball rolling 4 months ago. Also, Yelp is actually doing this. So businesses in town, in this town, in other towns near us, could register their business, I guess they claim their business on Yelp, and they could list their policy. So the action I would ask of you, and also to please push this upwards to county and state officials, to, catch fire a little bit, is to encourage businesses to register in this way and think about a framework where we know we see that. If a given restaurant says they have 99% of their staff vaccinated, and the restaurant next door has only 75%, I'd like to. What's that?
I get it. I'm sort of cutting you off, and I really don't mean to sound
Yes,
disrespectful. I
please,
mean,
yes.
I get your point, and it's just very late, but I get your point.
Thank you, Jeremy.
I'm sorry. Please don't take offense. There's
Yes,
plenty of
yes,
people
thank you all for your
plenty of people
consideration.
who take offense to me.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. We can hear you.
Yes, hello. Sorry, I was having a little trouble figuring out how to do this. I did want to comment on several things that have been said. That first, I want to say that we aren't the only town. We wouldn't be the only. First of all, I like to say I like the framework of it, and I understand that it would be something that gives us more flexibility than the present law. But we are not the only town that would have this. The town of Lewisboro has had a mask mandate for indoors since August 19th. And their supervisor is the one who did it, and it's renewed every 5 days. Also, I'd like to point out that the school district in Chappaqua did require indoor masks before the Department of Health did it. And they did it because they were following the CDC recommendations. It's interesting that some speakers have said that it isn't so bad in Chappaqua, but we have to realize that 25% of the people currently in Chappaqua, people who are eligible in Chappaqua, have not got vaccinated. And July 27th, when the CDC said that, guidelines said that we should in Westchester have indoor masks for everybody, there were 13 active cases in Newcastle. Yesterday, there were 31 active cases in Newcastle. So we have had a change in situation here. And the fourth thing I'd like to say is when I read the mask mandate that you sent out, there are requests, there are lots of options in it for requests for exemptions, and that any organization or individual can request because they think it's a hardship or an impractical. So I think there are some flexibilities in this. My main concern is that right now it would be wonderful to rely on voluntary compliance, but what's happening is that it's not happening. And if you go into Walgreens, or let me give that as an example, our students gather in Walgreens after school, even before school started. And they are not universally wearing masks. I don't know if they're vaccinated or not, but I think that we are undermining, if the town does not act on this soon, you're actually undermining the school district's well-intentioned efforts to return to normalcy. And I hope that you will think about doing this soon.
Thank you very much, Karen.
Thank you, Karen. I think that is a great point, too, about Newcastle's numbers. Newcastle and North, although many other towns surrounding us have flattened out a bit, Newcastle and North Castle have actually gone up. And so now we're at the same number, similar number of cases that we had in April.
Right.
Thank you very much.
It was the same number we had on April 16th. There were 30 cases in Newcastle. Today there are 31 active cases.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah, hello, so my name's Cal Watson. I appreciate you giving me a chance to speak, and I appreciate all of the dialogue, and I understand the position that you are in. I actually disagree with the woman who spoke just a little bit ago. Part of the problem is that from the start of this, we've had a lot of politicians who have weaponized this. We are now at the point, we're pretty fortunate that when you look at the town, our community, with vaccinations and with the people that have natural immunity from having had COVID, we're probably over 90%, way past herd immunity. We're probably going to have to face the fact that we're never going to have zero COVID. We're going to live with this the rest of our life. Vaccines, the best thing we can do is encourage people to get them and try to, as best as we can, go about living our life. And maybe there are points when it's bad enough that indoors we want to limit it. But I certainly don't think outdoors. I don't know if you can trace a case of somebody who's gotten infected because they're walking in the park. I had a chance to look at the data from one of the engineering firms that worked with Madison Square Garden to reopen it. And the reality is that you can shop in the grocery store and walk past somebody who is infected with COVID and actively infected and giving off the disease, and you don't have to be masked, and you can walk by him, that person, and shop, and you are not going to get COVID. So part of this is we really need to look at the data, truly look at the data, and not all of the talk and the wishes of people around that. And a lot of this is people are now so scared. We're not gonna get rid of this. It's so sometimes we have to live our life. It's like we get in the car, we get into all car deaths if we go to 10 miles an hour. So I just would hope that you would think about those things before you, if you do pass this, before you go to just a lockdown or mask mandate everywhere, because I don't think we'll ever see COVID zero. And the chance we're in a really phenomenal spot here with the vaccine rates that we have because people are educated and are doing the best thing. And it's sort of sometimes about time to also live our life. So I thank you. I appreciate the time to speak, and I appreciate the work that you guys are doing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. I was actually just discussing this exact topic with my colleagues at Regeneron who are experts in this space. And we were talking about the point at which COVID becomes endemic and how we move forward as a society with endemic COVID. The critical element to that is vaccination rate and vaccine eligibility. And we have not, even in the best communities, come close to sufficient immunity to have a safe endemic COVID prevalence. I do agree with you that COVID transmission in outdoor spaces is robustly less likely, which was why we were pursuing this modified legislation, appreciating that overly restrictive legislation that applied to outdoor spaces is inappropriate based on what the data tells us.
I appreciate that. I've also talked to some doctors who, have sort of said some of the opposite on the indoors. When you look at the percentages of people that have had breakthroughs, and that's where they haven't really seen the data yet on the ages and the comorbidities and the underlying issues for people that have had problems. Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.
All right, so, my thought, I appreciate all the different comments. My position and thought is that we should pass a legislation, and I would suggest, although, in the past, it's something we do hold open, I think this is a legislation that we don't hold open because who knows what next Wednesday, Tuesday, Monday, Saturday brings. So my vote is to move it forward and cross that bridge in terms of enactment later.
I agree. I think though, and I think, it's beholden to our supervisor to make sure that, he or she thinks long and hard before, enacting it and really, getting all the facts, whether or not, and depending on which area will be enacted as well. But I definitely think we should enact it, and I think you have a good point that you don't know what's going to happen.
Great. I support passing it and hope we have the courage to use it.
subject to Ed's change, the
Right,
change
so
discussed.
whomever makes the motion should just state that they're moving to adopt the proposed local law, but section 86-5B would be amended to add the word outdoors where we indicated earlier.
So someone just
Yep,
say so moved?
that's really important.
Say so moved, maybe?
So moved. Can we just
Second.
move that now?
I'll do it.
Moved it? It's
All in
moved?
favor?
Aye.
All right, so we on to other resolutions, are we done?
Yep, we have a separate resolution that's been sent to you for our police officer that was pulled out of the
Yep.
Yep, good.
consent agenda.
Did you emailed it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an email.
email.
Okay, won't do that. Okay.
Go ahead, just fire away.
Did I start? All right. I move to approve the consent agenda as submitted, consisting of authorization to appoint. Did the
We closed the public hearing. Yeah,
Oh,
I just
sorry.
want to make
We
note
did.
that we tabled the NCCMC one-year extension and also the authorization to issue the building permit refund.
right?
Okay, and the officer.
And we
Right.
took out the police officer
I have
and
that.
the
In the
King
landmark.
Street.
Oh, and the landmark.
Right.
Yep, and the police officer. Yeah.
For the BAB, should I name their names or does that matter, Jill? I'm sorry. It was Margaret Ferguson.
Vincent Conyers.
Vincent Ingrid.
Conyers?
Yes.
And I'm sorry, what was the other one?
Vincent Conyers.
Ingrid Scholes.
Okay. I move to approve the consent agenda as submitted, consisting of authorization to appoint the Beautification Advisory Board, Margaret Ferguson, Ingrid Scholes, and Vincent Connors. Authorization to hire a part-time recreation attendant at the Arts Center. Adoption of monthly reports August. Authorization to attend conference, the assessor. Authorization to repair Arts Center walkway. TBM Landscaping and Masonry Court. Authorization to solicit bids for 2022 Art and Community Center busing, recreation. Authorization to solicit bids for entertainment for the Ragamuffin Parade recreation. Authorization to approve banner requests, Chappaqua Children's Book Festival. Resolution.
And the light pole banners.
And the lamp pole banners. Resolution in support of the Town of Newcastle State Energy Research and Development Agency's Charge Ready Rebate Program.
And the building permit refund is?
No,
Oh, okay.
that's tabled.
Great. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Go ahead, Lori.
Move to approve the payment of claims in the amount of $848,289.02 listed on the summary pre-check writing report and detail voucher detail report, both dated September 10th, 2021. Checks will be issued and mailed to each claimant listed on Wednesday, September 15th,
Second.
2021.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move to adopt a local law to amend Chapter 86
We
of
just
the...
did that.
Oh,
We
we
just
did that without saying it. Great. Okay, so then it's just the other
Okay.
one.
I move, resolve that the town board approves the memorandum of agreement with ELQ Industries relating to punch list work and repairs, the payment of additional retainage in the amount of $247,456.32, and the commencement of the warranty period for the Chappaqua Streetscape and Infrastructure Improvement Project. And further resolve, the town administrator is authorized to execute the MOA on behalf of the town and to undertake such other and further actions as may be necessary to effectuate this resolution.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move to authorize the hiring of Daniel Riffenberg to the position of 4th grade police officer within the Town of Newcastle Police Department at the annual salary of $73,730 effective October 18, 2021, or the date Westchester County approves the resignation reinstatement. And thank you so much and welcome.
Yeah, welcome. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Carrie. Thanks, Lauren and Tiffany.